Hello everyone, I am the Creep's Cabin. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from? And what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. I was home alone that evening, which wasn't unusual for me. My roommates had all gone back home to visit family for the weekend, and I had stayed behind, trying to catch up on schoolwork. The house was eerily quiet, which on one hand was a bit unnerving, but on the other hand, I didn't mind the peace and quiet. I'd been living in this off-campus house for almost a year, and it had its quirks, but nothing that really bothered me until that night. I'd been doing homework all day, sitting in the living room, staring at the same pages over and over again. I felt exhausted, but not in the way that makes you fall asleep. It was more of a weird, restless energy. After a while, I decided I needed a break. So, I grabbed my shampoo and towel and headed for the bathroom. The bathroom was at the far end of the hallway, on the other side of the house. It was a typical college house bathroom, small, a little outdated, but functional. It was the only bathroom in the house, and the lack of space always bothered me, especially with 5 other people in the house. But tonight, it was just me. No one else to crowd the bathroom, no one else to make the place feel cramped. I turned on the shower, letting the steam fill the small space. The warm water was comforting, and I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the stress of the day wash away. I didn't have a lot of time to think about much, just the rush of the water against my skin, the sound of it splashing against the tiles. After a few minutes, I finished up and stepped out of the shower, wrapping the towel around my waist. I opened the bathroom door, expecting the usual silence of the house. But that's when I saw it. The ottoman from the living room chair was sitting directly in front of the bathroom door, blocking my way. It wasn't like it was casually pushed aside or anything. It was placed deliberately in front of the door, like someone had moved it there on purpose. My heart skipped a beat as I stared at it for a moment, unsure if I was seeing things. I had left the ottoman in its usual spot, across the room near the couch, but now it was right there, like it had been dragged over. I glanced around, trying to figure out if one of my roommates had come back early, but no one was there. I hadn't heard any voices, and there was no sound at all except for the low hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. I was completely alone. I stepped around the ottoman, my bare feet feeling cold against the wooden floor as I made my way toward the living room. Something about the ottoman being in front of the bathroom door unsettled me, but I brushed it off, thinking maybe I'd forgotten where I'd left it earlier. I was already second-guessing myself, but I kept going. As I walked toward the living room, something else caught my eye. The coats that had been hanging up in the front hall were gone. There had been a row of hooks along the wall in the entryway where everyone's coats usually hung. I remembered my own coat being there not even an hour ago. But now, instead of coats, there were tennis rackets hanging on the hooks. 4 of them, arranged neatly, like they belonged there. I froze, blinking a few times to make sure I wasn't imagining it. Tennis rackets. They had been buried under a pile of old and used stuff in the closet for as long as I could remember. I hadn't seen them in months, but now they were hanging up in plain sight, as if they had always been there. My mind raced. Had I been the one to move them? I tried to think back to when I last saw them. Had someone else come in and rearranged things? I didn't know, but something felt off. I walked closer to the front hall closet, opening the door. The coats, including my own, were hanging neatly inside. The coat I'd worn earlier was now hanging on a hanger in the closet, which was odd because I never used hangers for my coat. I'd always left it on the hook in the front hall, but there it was, hanging in the closet like it had been there all along. I took a few steps back, staring at the coats hanging in the closet. My own coat, with the sleeves slightly folded at the ends, hung perfectly next to the others. It felt like someone had been here, someone who knew exactly where my coat would go. My mind raced through the possibilities. Did I put it there without thinking? Had one of my roommates come back unexpectedly? But I was sure I was alone in the house. The oddity of the situation began to gnaw at me. I closed the closet door quietly, trying not to disturb anything. My heart was beating a little faster now, my pulse thudding in my ears. I glanced over at the front door, wondering if anyone was standing outside, maybe watching through the window. But I didn't see anyone. The house was as still as it had been when I stepped out of the shower. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. It was probably nothing, just a weird coincidence. I walked back into the living room, trying to distract myself. Maybe I'd been more tired than I realized. Maybe I was just imagining things. I sat down on the couch, my towel still wrapped around my waist, and pulled my laptop onto my lap to try and focus on my homework. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The ottoman, the tennis rackets, the coats, they all seemed so out of place. And yet, everything seemed normal at the same time. I couldn't pinpoint exactly why it was bothering me. It was like a sense of unease that kept creeping up on me, no matter how hard I tried to push it away. I sat there for a while, staring at the screen of my laptop, trying to get some work done. But my mind kept drifting back to the oddities around me. I kept glancing at the front hall, wondering if I was just being paranoid, or if someone had been in the house. But every time I looked, everything seemed to be in its place, like nothing had changed. As the evening wore on, I tried to push it all out of my mind. But it wasn't until I heard a faint sound that I realized I wasn't alone. It was a soft creaking, like someone was moving around the house. I immediately froze, listening. The sound came again, this time from upstairs. The floorboards creaked, the distinct sound of someone walking across the floor. My heart skipped a beat. I grabbed my phone, quickly pulling up the security camera app. I had a few cameras installed around the house for peace of mind, and I glanced at the live feed. The front yard was empty. The backyard was empty. The hallway camera was still showing the front hall, and there was no one there. I checked the living room feed. Nothing, but I could still hear the creaking. Whoever was upstairs was moving, walking around. And then I heard it again. The sound of something shifting, like someone was rearranging things. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. This wasn't right. Someone was definitely in the house. My breath caught in my throat as I slowly stood up from the couch, making my way toward the staircase. Every step I took felt heavy, my legs stiff with fear. I didn't know who was up there, or what they were doing, but I couldn't stay here. Not anymore. I grabbed the nearest thing I could find, a broom from the hallway closet, and held it out in front of me like some kind of weapon. My hands were shaking as I took a deep breath and started to move toward the stairs. The creaking stopped. For a moment, everything was silent. The kind of silence that was so heavy, you could almost hear the thud of your own heartbeat. And then I heard it, a quiet knock, not from upstairs, but from the front door. My heart stopped. I could feel the blood drain from my face as I stared at the door, the broom still clutched in my hands. Whoever it was, they were here, outside, waiting. I didn't move. Another knock. I finally found my voice. Hello. Nothing. No response. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know if I should answer or just ignore it. But I knew I couldn't stay in the house any longer. I needed to get out. I ran for the back door, flinging it open as I rushed outside. The cold night air hit my skin, and I could hear the sound of my footsteps pounding against the gravel as I ran. I didn't stop until I reached my car, and I didn't look back. I didn't want to know what was behind me. That night, I drove to a friend's house, and I didn't go back to the college house for days. When I finally did return, the house was just as I'd left it, empty and quiet. But there was a part of me that couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, had been there that night. Someone had been in my house, moving things around, watching me. And I still don't know who it was. I remember the night clearly, like it happened just yesterday. I was visiting my aunt, who lived completely alone in a small house far out in the countryside. She had no pets, and honestly, it felt like a quiet, solitary existence. I was always a little uncomfortable in her house, probably because of how eerily quiet it always was. No children running around, no dogs barking, just silence, broken only by the occasional sound of wind rattling the windows. It wasn't that I didn't like the place. It was cozy, warm even. But there was something unsettling about the isolation. I had come to stay for a couple of nights, hoping to catch up with her. She was a kind woman, but she kept to herself. Most of her friends lived miles away, and I often wondered how she managed to live like that, alone and quiet, day after day. I had arrived at her house around dusk, and we spent the evening talking. After dinner, I retired to the living room, stretched out on the couch with the remote in hand. The house was dark, save for the light from the television, casting a faint glow across the room. I remember feeling a little sleepy after all the food, and I must have drifted off with the remote still clutched in my hand. The couch wasn't the most comfortable, but it was cozy enough to doze off on. The room was silent except for the sound of the television, the low hum of the screen. It must have been around midnight when I woke up, my eyes cracking open slowly as I became aware of something off. The room was still dark, save for the dim light from the TV. The faint, cold light flickered a little, and I could just make out the shape of a person standing there, hunched over the television. It wasn't my aunt. My aunt never stood that way, never hunched over like that in the middle of the night. It was like someone was kneeling or crouching down, right in front of the screen. I couldn't make out their face, but I could see the vague outline of a figure, dressed in dark clothing, their posture tense and unnatural. My heart skipped a beat. I wasn't sure if I was dreaming or if something was really there. The figure didn't move, just stood there, like it was staring at the screen. Then, as if to confirm that something was wrong, the figure reached forward and manually switched the television off. Just like that, the screen went dark and the low hum of the TV stopped completely. I froze, the remote still in my hand. My mind raced. Had I imagined it? Was I still asleep? But no, this was real. I still held the remote, my fingers clenching around it in confusion. Without thinking, I pressed the power button, and the TV flickered back to life. The light from the screen briefly illuminated the figure again, and I could see them sigh, an exasperated deep breath, like they were annoyed by me. Then, without saying a word, the figure reached out and switched the TV off again. My heart hammered in my chest. I couldn't believe it. What the hell was going on? I had to speak up, even though my voice felt like it was trapped in my throat. I couldn't let this happen again, couldn't just sit there like a scared kid. I cleared my throat, gathering what little courage I had left. "Hey," I called out, my voice hoarse. The response I got was not at all what I expected. A deep, angry male voice hissed back from the darkness. "Shut the fuck up, bitch." My blood turned cold. That voice was like nothing I had ever heard before, so raw, so menacing, like it was coming from deep within the earth, cold and full of hatred. I couldn't breathe. My body locked up, and for a moment, all I could do was sit there in complete and utter paralysis. I stayed still, not even daring to blink. My heart was pounding in my ears, and the fear coursing through me felt physical, like a heavy weight pressing down on my chest. I could hear the figure shift, the shuffle of feet on the hardwood floor, as if they were walking away. I didn't move, didn't make a sound. Every part of my body wanted to run, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. I stayed frozen, caught between the overwhelming urge to escape and the fear that moving would make things worse. Minutes passed. At least, I think it was minutes, maybe more, before I finally gathered the strength to move. I stood up, my legs shaky, my mind racing. I grabbed the remote, and without even thinking, I bolted from the couch, my breath coming in short gasps. My mind was screaming at me to get to my aunt. She had to know. This couldn't just be in my head. I ran down the hallway, the house feeling much bigger now, more claustrophobic. The walls seemed to close in on me as I reached my aunt's bedroom door. I knocked, almost frantically. "Aunt Carol! Aunt Carol!" I called, my voice shaking. She stirred from inside, and the door opened a crack. "What's wrong, honey?" she asked, her voice still thick with sleep. I barely got the words out. "There's someone in the house." I heard them. "Someone is here." She looked at me, her face still groggy from sleep, but something in her eyes softened. "What do you mean? It's just you and me here." "No, there was someone," I insisted, my voice rising. "I heard them. I saw them. They were standing by the TV, and I couldn't even finish. The words felt like they were caught in my throat. My aunt frowned, clearly not understanding. She glanced back into her room, then turned to the side of her bed, where she kept a small pistol hidden in a drawer. "All right, let's go check it out," she said, her voice calm, but I could see the concern creeping into her features. She grabbed the gun, and we moved together, tiptoeing through the house. The floorboards creaked under our feet, the silence oppressive, like the house was holding its breath. We checked the living room first, the TV off now, but everything seemed just as it should be. The house was completely still. There were no signs of anyone being there. Then we moved to the front door. The bolt lock was still latched from the inside, just as it had been when I had arrived earlier that evening. We checked the back door, and the same. The lock was firmly secured. No sign of a break-in. No signs that anyone had been there at all. "What are you talking about?" my aunt asked, sounding confused but also a little worried. "There's no one here, honey." I felt my heart sinking. But they were here. I heard them. I saw them. That voice. My voice faltered, and I couldn't finish my sentence. My aunt was still looking at me, her face filled with concern but not fully understanding. We moved to the windows, the ones overlooking the yard. The snow outside had settled quietly, covering everything in a thick, undisturbed layer. There wasn't a single footprint to be seen anywhere in the snow. The driveway was untouched, and the yard was clear. No sign of anyone having walked up to the house, no sign of anyone coming or going. Maybe it was just a dream, my aunt said softly, her voice full of disbelief. You've had a long drive, and it's late. I know it's creepy out here, but you're just imagining things. But I knew it hadn't been a dream. There was something about that voice, deep, angry, and so real, that I could never forget. We searched the house for a good while, but we found nothing. No signs of a break-in, no disturbances. Just the stillness of the house. The cold air creeping through the walls, the silence pressing in around us. When we finally returned to the living room, I sat on the couch, trying to calm down, my hands still trembling. I knew what I'd heard, what I'd seen. That man's voice, still clear in my mind. The way it had hissed at me, so angry, so vicious. In the days that followed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I kept replaying that moment over and over in my head. How had that figure gotten into the house? How had they been there without us hearing them? The snow outside was undisturbed, the locks were all secure. And still, that voice lingered in my mind, a constant reminder that something had happened that night, something that we couldn't explain. As I packed up to leave, my aunt gave me a warm hug and assured me everything was fine. She seemed to genuinely believe that I had just had a nightmare. But as I drove away, looking back at her house in the rearview mirror, I couldn't shake the feeling that I hadn't imagined it. That voice, those footsteps in the dark, they were real. Even now, when I think back to that night, I can still hear it. The voice that told me to shut the fuck up, bitch. I don't know who it was, or how they got into that house, but I will never forget the way it sounded. I know that voice wasn't just a figment of my imagination. I never believed in anything supernatural. It just didn't make sense to me. I mean, come on, ghosts, spirits, things like that. Those are just stories people tell to explain things they don't understand. But over the course of about a year, I experienced two things that to this day I can't explain. And I'll admit, those two things scared the living hell out of me. And honestly, I still can't shake the feeling of unease when I think back to them. I was locked up at a juvenile detention center in Hawthorne, Nevada. The place was an old military medical building, repurposed after the war, like so many old government buildings that had lost their purpose. I'd been in trouble for a while, and the system had decided that it was time for me to pay my dues. I was supposed to be there for a while, 3 months in the detention center, and then 9 months of rehabilitation after. I'm not going to get into the details of what landed me there. Honestly, it doesn't matter, but what does matter is that I ended up in this creepy old building, and things happened that I can't explain. The facility was in a strange place, a remote part of Nevada. You wouldn't even know it was there unless you were looking for it. The building was old, crumbling in places, with long hallways that were half lit by flickering lights. It had a reputation among the other kids for being haunted. People said there were dead girls walking the hallways at night, soldiers who lost their limbs who would show up in dreams. And of course, every new kid that came through the doors had to share a new story about some creepy thing they saw or heard. People would talk about the place like it was cursed, but I wasn't one of those kids who bought into the ghost stories. I just wanted to serve my time, get out, and move on. I'm a heavy sleeper, always have been. I've slept through storms, loud noises, and growing up in a house full of kids with parents who were always fighting, I learned to sleep through a lot. So, when I went to bed that night, I wasn't expecting anything weird. It was just like every other night in that place, with the constant hum of the air vents and the occasional sound of someone walking in the halls. I was dead asleep, just like usual, when it happened. At first, it was subtle, a weird sensation, like a jolt of electricity running through my body. It wasn't painful, but it was sharp, like being shocked by a weak stun gun. I shot up in bed, my heart racing, but I wasn't sure what had just happened. I glanced around, my eyes adjusting to the dim light in the room. That's when I saw it. There was a dark mass hovering above me. It was hard to describe at first, but it looked like a cloud, transparent but solid. It was a strange, dark shade of black that didn't fit with the shadows in the room. I stared at it for what felt like an eternity. maybe 3 seconds, maybe 5, before it moved quickly, almost jerking upward into the corner of the room, out of sight. It didn't make a sound, no rustling, no creaking. It just moved. I sat up for a long time, wide awake, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself it wasn't real. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. But I didn't see anything more that night, and eventually, I managed to fall asleep again. I still don't know what it was. Was it a trick of my mind, a weird side effect of the stress I was under? Maybe. But whatever it was, it freaked me out. And it didn't help that the place was full of stories about people seeing strange things. But I still told myself it was nothing. A few weeks later, I was transferred to another facility. This one was in empty Charleston, Nevada, near Las Vegas. It was different, more of a rehab facility, located in a small cabin in the woods. The place was quiet, and there were a lot fewer kids. But it wasn't the peace and quiet I was looking for. No, this place gave me a whole new kind of fear. The first night, I didn't think much of it. I was trying to adjust to the change, settle in, and get some sleep. That night, I fell asleep easily enough, but something strange happened. I woke up, sort of. I wasn't fully conscious, but I wasn't fully asleep either. It was like I was caught in this weird in-between state. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. My body felt like it was trapped, but my mind was wide awake. I could hear the creaks of the cabin, the sound of wind outside, but nothing else. My heart was pounding. I was stuck. I had heard about sleep paralysis before, but I didn't really know much about it. It was one of those things you read about in books or hear other people talk about, but you never expect it to happen to you. I tried to move, tried to scream, but nothing worked. It felt like my body was frozen in place, my limbs completely numb, like they were tied down. But I could still see everything, every tiny detail of the room around me. The walls, the windows, the shadows that stretched out from the corners. At first, I didn't know what was happening. I was just stuck there, completely immobilized. But then, I started to feel something else. Something off. Like I wasn't alone. I could hear something, faint at first, just a small shift in the air. But it was getting closer. I didn't know how I knew, but I could sense it. Something was in the room with me. I wanted to look, wanted to see what it was, but my head wouldn't move. My eyes were fixed straight ahead, frozen in place, and all I could do was listen. I tried again to scream, but nothing came out. I don't know how long it was before I actually saw it. I wasn't sure at first, but there, in the corner of the room, I could make out a shadow. It was dark, just like the rest of the room, but it was moving. At first, I thought it was just my eyes playing tricks on me, but then it became clearer. It wasn't a shadow at all. It was a figure. It wasn't a human figure, though, not like anyone I had ever seen. It was tall, unnaturally thin, with long, spindly limbs that bent at odd angles. The skin was pale, like it had never seen the sun, and there were blotches of yellow across its body, almost like it was sick. But the worst part, the part that made my blood run cold, was its face. There was no face. No eyes, no nose, no mouth. Just smooth, pale skin. And even though it didn't have eyes, I could feel it staring right at me. It didn't have a mouth, but I could almost hear it breathing, slow, deliberate, like it was savoring the fear it was causing. My heart raced, and I could feel the adrenaline coursing through me, but my body wouldn't move. I couldn't do anything. Then it started to move. Its limbs contorted in ways that shouldn't have been possible, twisting around, getting lower to the ground. It wasn't walking, not exactly. It was more like it was crawling, but with an eerie, unnatural speed. It moved toward me, getting closer, closer, until it was right in front of me. My mind screamed, but nothing came out. It was like I was suffocating, trapped in my own body, helpless. It was right there, face to face with me, its featureless, blank face just inches away from mine. The air in the room felt thick, heavy, like it was pressing down on me from all sides. And then, just like that, I woke up. My body was finally free, my limbs working again, and I was sitting up in bed, drenched in sweat, gasping for breath. My heart was racing, and I couldn't stop shaking. I had no idea what had just happened, but I knew it wasn't normal. No one else was awake, and I didn't want to talk about it. I didn't even want to think about it. I just sat there in the darkness, trying to convince myself that it was just a dream. But it wasn't. I knew it wasn't. After that night, I couldn't sleep right for weeks. Every time I closed my eyes, I kept thinking about that thing in the corner of the room, watching me. I didn't tell anyone, though. Who would believe me? I still don't know what I saw. I can't explain it. I don't know if it was my mind playing tricks on me, some weird side effect of sleep paralysis, or something else entirely, but it was real to me. The weird thing is, after that night, the sleep paralysis stopped. Completely. It was like it never happened. I slept better than I ever had before, and I haven't experienced anything like it again since. But the memory of that thing, the thing I saw in the room, stays with me. I don't know if I'll ever truly understand what it was, but it was real, and that's something I can't shake. I still don't believe in the supernatural. But after that, after what happened to me, it's hard not to question everything I thought I knew. I was 19 when I first moved in with my boyfriend, now my husband, and his family. It was a bit of a transition for me, having spent my whole life living with my own family. I wasn't used to being around so many people, and at first it felt strange. His family consisted of him, his two little sisters, his mom, and his stepdad. His mom worked the night shift at a local diner, and she usually left around 10 p.m. to start her shift. His stepdad worked odd hours too, so the house was often quiet, except for when his little sisters were running around. One evening, it was a little after 9:30 p.m., and my boyfriend was waiting outside for me so we could go out. I was in the middle of getting dressed, taking a little longer than expected. I knew it was getting late, but I figured it wouldn't take long. I walked out of the bedroom, down the hallway, and into the living room, where I saw his mom sweeping the floor. She was in her usual work clothes, which was a pair of loose jeans and a worn t-shirt. Her long, brown hair was pulled back into a messy ponytail. The sound of the broom scraping against the floor was the only noise in the house, and the soft hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. I was a little surprised to see her up so late, because I knew she had to work soon, but I said hello as I walked through the living room. She stopped sweeping and looked at me as I passed, smiling faintly. I told her we were heading out, and that we'd be back soon. She nodded, still holding the broom, and just watched me leave. I didn't think much of it. I opened the door, stepping out onto the porch. The night air felt crisp, and the house was quiet behind me. I glanced around, expecting to see her car in the driveway, but it wasn't there. I paused for a moment, thinking maybe her husband had borrowed it for an errand. I figured I'd ask my boyfriend when he would be back, so I could let her know it was time to head out to work. I walked over to my boyfriend, who was leaning against his truck, looking at his phone. I asked him when his stepdad would be back, since I thought his mom had just left to go to work. His response was immediate, but not what I was expecting. "She already left for work," he said, glancing up at me with a confused look. I frowned, trying to make sense of what was happening. "No," I told him, shaking my head. "I just saw her. She was in the house. She was sweeping in the living room. She told me she was going to work." He stared at me, not saying anything for a moment, and then he repeated what he had just said, but with more certainty this time. "She's already gone, babe. She left a little while ago." My stomach twisted. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. The house had always felt strange to me, like it wasn't entirely right. I chalked it up to being in a new place, a new environment, but I started to feel that nagging, unsettling feeling again. I looked back at the house, half expecting to see her standing in the doorway, watching us. But the house was dark and still. The lights inside had been off for a while now, and the porch light flickered in the cold wind. My boyfriend's stepdad was already in bed, and I couldn't have imagined it. I wasn't mistaken. The unsettling feeling lingered long after we got in the truck and left for our destination. But it wasn't just that night that felt off. There were other things that happened in that house, little moments that made you pause and question whether or not something was wrong. Nothing ever happened in a way you could point to and say, "That was definitely strange," but there were enough things to make you wonder. For instance, there were times when I'd hear noises in the house, like footsteps in the hallway when no one else was awake. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, and the house would be completely silent, except for the occasional creak of the floorboards. It was hard to tell if it was just the house settling or something more. I'd lay there, wide awake, listening to the silence, trying to convince myself it was nothing. And then there were the times when I'd catch glimpses of movement out of the corner of my eye. Like, you know when you see someone walking in your peripheral vision, but when you look, no one's there? That happened a lot. It would be in the hallway, or sometimes in the living room, but when I looked up, there was never anyone there. I'd tell myself it was just a trick of the light or a shadow from the trees outside, but the feeling that something wasn't right never quite went away. As the months passed, his little sisters started talking about strange things happening too. One night, they told us they had both heard strange noises coming from the kitchen in the middle of the night, like dishes moving on their own or a faucet turning on by itself. They said it happened so often that they'd just gotten used to it. But the way they spoke about it, like it was an everyday occurrence, made my skin crawl. My boyfriend's mom seemed to notice things too, but she never said much about it. I think she just wanted to brush it off, not wanting to draw attention to it. But it wasn't just me or the kids. My boyfriend's stepdad had his own share of odd experiences, though he'd never talk about it with anyone. I knew he'd been awake at strange hours, pacing around the house, even though it was obvious that he wasn't asleep. But when I'd ask him if something was wrong, he'd always brush it off, saying he just couldn't sleep. One time, I remember waking up in the middle of the night to the sound of someone knocking on the door. It wasn't a normal knock. It was loud and rhythmic, like someone was trying to get our attention. I stayed still for a few seconds, thinking maybe it was the wind or an animal, but the knocking didn't stop. I got up to check, heart pounding in my chest, but when I opened the door, no one was there. I stepped outside, looking around in the dark, but the only sound I could hear was the wind rustling through the trees. It wasn't until I went back inside that I realized I wasn't alone. My boyfriend had heard the knocking too, and had come downstairs, but he said he hadn't heard anything after I opened the door. It was as if whatever was there had vanished the moment I stepped outside. It was strange, but in a way, it was almost like a relief, not knowing what it was. I tried to convince myself that it was nothing, that my mind was playing tricks on me. But after a while, it became harder to ignore. The sense of unease kept building up, especially when the house felt too quiet at night. Sometimes I would sit in the living room, alone, and feel like something was watching me. I'd glance around, half expecting to see someone standing in the doorway or behind the couch, but no one was ever there. Things didn't get any better after that. Every time I thought it was just my imagination, something else would happen. His mom would talk about strange feelings, too, like she'd wake up and feel like someone was in the room with her, but when she looked, there was no one there. Eventually, we moved out. It wasn't just the strange occurrences that made us leave. It was everything, the feeling of being constantly on edge, like we were never truly alone. I still don't know what it was about that house, but it wasn't just the creaks or the knocks. It was the feeling that no matter how many people were there, the house was never truly empty. As I think back on it now, I can't help but wonder if there's something about that place that we never understood. Maybe it was just an old house with a lot of quirks, or maybe there was something more to it. But one thing I know for sure is that I'll never forget that night when I saw his mom in the living room. Even now, I can still feel the chill that ran down my spine when I realized she hadn't been home at all. It's a memory that haunts me, even years later. His little sisters are teenagers now, and they've had their own strange experiences in that house too. But we've all moved on, and that chapter of our lives is behind us. Still, every now and then, when I'm alone at night, I can't help but remember the way the house felt. And even though I don't believe in ghosts or supernatural things, there's something about that place that I'll never fully understand. Thanksgiving this year started off as any other. I was looking forward to spending the holiday with my family, enjoying a quiet evening, while my wife took the opportunity to go out shopping for Black Friday deals. It was just me and the kids, my 5-month-old son, who still slept in our room, and my 2-year-old, who had been pretty easygoing that evening, making bedtime a breeze. My wife left around 9 p.m., leaving me to handle the night shift. By the time she left, the kids were already in bed, and I settled in to watch some TV before the inevitable middle-of-the-night wake-up calls began. Around midnight, my son woke up crying. I had just finished scrolling through my phone, and I knew it was time to get him back to sleep. I picked him up gently, trying to soothe him with a soft hum while pacing back and forth in our bedroom. I couldn't see much. The room was pitch black, aside from the faint light coming from the street lamp outside through the window. It was one of those quiet, still nights, the kind where you could hear your heartbeat if you focused hard enough. I rocked back and forth in the dark, just me, my son, and the silence. Then all of a sudden, I felt a rush of cold air. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and before I even thought about it, I gasped. My breath caught in my throat, and my entire body froze. Out of the corner of my eye, I thought I saw something. I turned my head quickly, and saw what I can only describe as a figure, a shape resembling my 2-year-old son, standing just a few feet away from me in the dark. It wasn't him, though. The figure was made of some kind of mist or glowing white light, not solid, but definitely in the shape of a small person. It wasn't the normal shadow you'd expect in a dark room, and it wasn't a trick of the light. This felt different. I blinked, and just like that, it was gone. My heart was racing now, and I stood there in the silence, still holding my son, unsure of what had just happened. I tried to shake it off. Maybe it was just a moment of dizziness or exhaustion, but I couldn't ignore the strange feeling that crept up my spine. My son's crying had stopped, and I gently laid him back down in his crib, trying to tell myself it was nothing, but the feeling of unease lingered. My skin felt prickly, like I wasn't alone anymore. The rest of the night was a blur of restless sleep and brief moments of tension. I kept waking up, feeling like I was being watched. Every time I opened my eyes, the darkness seemed deeper, more oppressive. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the other room, the soft rustling of the trees outside, but something wasn't right. I couldn't pinpoint it. I didn't want to wake my wife, so I kept it to myself, hoping it was just stress from the busy evening. But after that night, things started to change. At first, it was small things. I'd walk by the toys in the living room, and they'd turn on by themselves. At first, I thought it was a malfunction. Maybe the kids had left one on, and it just happened to go off again. But it happened again the next day, and then the next. I'd pass the toys, and one would start playing music or lighting up, even though no one had touched it. Sometimes I would be in the kitchen, and I'd hear the sound of a toy going off in the other room, and I'd rush in to find it running on its own. It wasn't all the toys, just certain ones, like the ones that played soft lullabies or had motion sensors. The lights started acting up, too. Sometimes I'd be in the living room, sitting quietly, and I'd hear the soft click of a light turning on in another room. At first, I chalked it up to faulty wiring. Old houses do that sometimes, right? But then it would turn off when I wasn't looking, and sometimes I'd walk into a room to find the light on, even though I was sure I had left it off. I checked the switches. Nothing seemed out of place. Still, it happened again and again. Every time I turned a corner or entered a room, I'd feel that same sensation of being watched, like someone or something was always just behind me. There was one night, a few weeks after the first incident, when my wife and I were sitting on the bed talking. We were discussing some household projects and, in typical married fashion, teasing each other about the various ways we could tackle them. As we talked, I absent-mindedly reached over to the drawer where we kept a few of our more personal items. I was trying to grab something to show her when suddenly, out of nowhere, the vibrator in the drawer turned on, full throttle. The sound was loud enough to make both of us jump, and I froze, staring at the drawer. It didn't make sense. It wasn't plugged in, and it had no reason to be on. I couldn't explain it. I pulled the drawer open, thinking maybe it had somehow turned on by mistake. But no, there was no button pressed, and nothing was out of place. It was as if it had just turned on by itself, as though someone, or something, had been watching us, waiting for the right moment. After that, I started to feel it even more. The presence in the room. It wasn't something I could see, but it was there. I'd be walking down the hall, and I'd get the overwhelming feeling that someone was behind me, watching me. I'd glance over my shoulder and find nothing. I'd be sitting in the living room, and suddenly, I'd feel a cold spot in the air, like a chill running down my spine, and I'd look up, only to find nothing there. My son, who had been the focus of the strange occurrences from the start, seemed to be the one most affected. He'd wake up crying in the middle of the night, not because of hunger or discomfort, but because he seemed restless, unsettled. His eyes would dart around the room like he was looking for something, or someone. I couldn't tell my wife everything. I didn't want to scare her, especially with everything else going on. But I had to admit that something wasn't right. I started researching. I looked into the history of the house, though there wasn't much to find. The house was built in the 1940s, and the owners before us had lived here for decades. There was no record of anything unusual happening, no reports of strange occurrences or accidents. It didn't make sense. This was a regular house in a regular neighborhood. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that maybe there was something to it after all. One night, I decided to stay up late and watch the house. I had to know what was going on, even if it scared me. I sat in the dark, waiting, listening for anything out of the ordinary. The house was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that presses in on you, makes every little sound seem amplified. I sat there, staring at the hallway, waiting for something to happen. Nothing did. But the longer I sat there, the more I felt it, the sensation that something was there, just out of sight. I felt it in the pit of my stomach, the way your body reacts to being in the dark too long, waiting for something that might never come. After what felt like hours, I finally gave up and went to bed. But as I lay there, still unable to sleep, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I could hear my son breathing softly in his crib beside me, but in the stillness, the room felt crowded. There was a presence, something invisible, something I couldn't explain. It wasn't malicious, but it was unsettling. It was like having someone watch you constantly, even when you couldn't see them. I kept thinking about the time I saw the misty figure in the room. I wondered if it was something trying to make itself known, or if it was a figment of my imagination. Either way, I couldn't shake the fear that something was lingering in our house, attached to my son, focusing on him. Maybe it was harmless, just a weird fluke, but I couldn't be sure. A few weeks passed without much happening, and I started to hope it was all over. Maybe it was just a strange combination of exhaustion and stress. But then, one evening, while I was putting my son down for bed, I saw something that made my blood run cold. I was standing in the doorway of his room, watching him settle into his crib, when I saw the shadow move. It wasn't a shadow from the light outside, nor was it a trick of the eyes. This shadow moved against the grain of the rest of the room, slipping across the floor like a dark stain. It was brief, fleeting, but unmistakable. And then, just like that, it was gone. I rushed out of the room, heart pounding in my chest, unsure of what I had just seen. I didn't say anything to my wife. I couldn't. I didn't know how to explain it, and I didn't want to make her worry. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Something was in that house, attached to us, to my son. It wasn't anything supernatural, at least not in the way most people would imagine. It wasn't a ghost or a demon. It was something more unsettling, an unseen presence that never seemed to go away, always lingering in the corners of my mind, just out of reach. The next day, I started looking for answers. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but I couldn't ignore what I had felt and seen. Maybe there was something in the house that needed to be fixed. Maybe it was the old wiring causing the weird electrical issues, or maybe the house itself had an energy that we didn't understand. Either way, I wasn't going to let it control us. I was going to protect my family, and I was going to figure out what was going on. Things didn't get any worse, but the feeling never quite went away. I never saw that misty figure again, but the strange occurrences kept happening. I started looking into ways to clear negative energy, hoping it was something as simple as that. I wanted peace. I wanted my family to feel safe in our home again. And slowly, over time, things started to return to normal. The toys stopped turning on by themselves, the lights no longer flickered without reason, and the presence, while still there, seemed to fade into the background. My son slept better, and we all started feeling more at ease. Maybe it was just a phase, or maybe the house had something it wanted to show us. Whatever it was, I knew that it had left us, at least for now. I'll never forget that night, though. The night when I saw the misty figure standing in our room. I'll never forget the feeling of something being there, just beyond my reach. But I'm learning to live with it, knowing that some things can't be explained, and some feelings, no matter how unsettling, eventually fade away. It's been a tough year for us. Not just the typical work stress, but everything felt like it was closing in on us. The business, our finances, the losses in the family. The kind of year that wears you down in ways you didn't think were possible. We've always been a resilient couple, finding a way through whatever life throws at us. But lately, everything felt like a struggle. Nothing was going the way we wanted. Brexit was still causing ripples in the business. Sales had dropped, and the bills were stacking up. There were times, late at night, when I'd sit at the kitchen table, looking at spreadsheets, wondering how we'd make it to the next month. And then, on top of all that, the personal stuff. Deaths in the family hit us hard. It wasn't just the grief, though that was bad enough, but the way it threw everything off course. It changed our daily routine, our outlook on life, how we approached everything. I had to deal with the absence of certain family members who had been pillars of support, and without them, things felt less secure, like we were standing on unstable ground. It made everything feel more difficult, especially the business. Without the emotional support, it was easy to feel like we were fighting a losing battle. But in the middle of it all, there was my husband. He had always been my rock, the person who kept me grounded when I was ready to float off into the storm. Even now, when things were the toughest, he still managed to make me laugh, even when it felt impossible. A couple of nights ago, we found ourselves in the middle of another of our late-night talks, just the two of us, trying to find some sense of normalcy in a year that had torn apart so much of our lives. I had just opened a bottle of wine, and we sat together, sipping it slowly, the room dimly lit, the house unusually quiet. The kids were staying at my sister's for the night, giving us a rare moment of peace. We were talking about Christmas. It felt ridiculous, to be honest. Christmas was supposed to be a time of joy, family, and celebration. But I wasn't feeling it. Not this year. Not with everything that had happened. Christmas is coming, I said, almost to myself, staring at the wine in my glass. Yeah, I know, he replied, not sounding much more enthusiastic than I felt. What do you want for Christmas? I shrugged, not really thinking about it. What did I want? I'd stopped thinking about myself for a long time. I could only think about the business, the kids, the bills. A light, he said after a pause. I blinked at him, not sure if I had heard him correctly. A light. He nodded, his face serious. A light at the end of the tunnel. It caught me off guard. I laughed, but it wasn't the kind of laugh that came from humor. It was the kind of laughter that bubbles up when you're too close to the edge. The kind where you're laughing, but you're really just about to break down. Yeah, a light, he repeated, his voice soft, but the weight of what he was saying wasn't lost on me. The laughter felt good, though. A small release from the pressure that had been building up inside me. And for a moment, I almost forgot about the weight of everything. It was just the two of us, sitting there in the dark, sharing a bottle of wine, laughing at the absurdity of it all. Later, as I was folding laundry in the bedroom, I heard my phone ring downstairs. I didn't think much of it at first, since he was just downstairs, but when I looked at the caller ID, it was my husband. I raised an eyebrow, confused. I answered the phone. Hey, what's up? I asked, a little distracted by the pile of clothes in front of me. His voice came through the phone, low and steady, almost too calm. Look outside the back bedroom window. I stopped what I was doing. What? What are you talking about? Look outside, he repeated, this time his voice a bit firmer. Look out the back bedroom window. Now, I was baffled, but I figured there must be something outside he wanted to show me. So, I made my way to the spare bedroom and peered out the window into the garden, my heart still heavy from our earlier conversation. I saw it immediately. There, at the end of our long, narrow garden, stood a soft blue light. A tree, bathed in a gentle glow, flickered softly in the dark night. I stood there for a moment, confused. My mind tried to make sense of it. I hadn't put any lights out there, and I certainly hadn't seen any lights on in the garden for ages. It took me a couple of seconds to realize what I was looking at, the solar fairy lights. We'd put them on the tree at the far end of the garden a few years ago, just as a bit of decoration, a small touch to bring some cheer to the space. But they had stopped working after the second British winter. I remember trying everything to fix them, changing the batteries, adjusting the wires, even cleaning the solar panel. But nothing worked. The lights had died a slow death, and we had just left them there, gathering dust forgotten. It seemed pointless to take them down since they were useless. But now here they were glowing. Softly. They hadn't worked in years, and there they were, twinkling as if they had just been plugged in. I walked back to the stairs, my mind racing. What the hell was going on? I couldn't even wrap my head around it. How could they suddenly come back to life after all this time? It didn't make any sense. And then, before I could even think more about it, the lights slowly began to dim, flickering one by one. It didn't take long before they were completely dark again. I stood there for a moment, just staring at the spot where the lights had been. They hadn't worked in so long, and now they had come back, only to fade away again. I went back downstairs to where my husband was, still sitting at the kitchen table. That was weird, I said, my voice a little shakier than I expected. He looked up at me with a small smile, but his eyes were serious. Yeah, I know. They were working for a couple of hours before they went out again. Why do you think they worked? I asked, still trying to make sense of it. I don't know, he said, his voice quiet. Maybe they just needed a little reminder, a little bit of attention. I couldn't explain it, but something about it made me feel lighter. Not much, but just enough. It felt like a small sign, a tiny glimmer of hope in a year that had been so dark. Maybe it was a stretch, but I couldn't help feeling like it meant something. Like the universe, or whatever you want to call it, was telling us that there was still a chance. That after all the struggles, after everything that had gone wrong, There might be a little bit of light waiting for us. That night, I went to bed with a strange sense of peace. The fairy lights were gone, but for a little while, they had been there. And that was enough. I don't know if I believe in signs, or if it was just a weird coincidence. Maybe it was just the way my tired mind was grasping for something to hold on to. But whatever it was, it gave me the strength to keep going. It gave me the hope that even in the darkest times, there could be a flicker of light, just enough to help you make it through. In the end, that's what I needed. Hope. Hope that things would get better. Hope that we would find a way through the mess. Hope that the next year would be kinder to us than this one had been. And so, as Christmas came and went, I held on to that light, however small it was. I knew it wasn't a miracle, but it didn't have to be. It was just a sign, a little reminder to keep going, to keep pushing forward. And with that, I found the strength to face the new year with a little more hope in my heart. And maybe that's all we really need sometimes. A little bit of hope. A little bit of light in the dark. It was the summer break between grades, and I remember it well because I was about 13 or 14 years old. One of those times in your life where you think you can stay up all night, no problem. I had a habit of staying up until sunrise, playing computer games until my eyes started to sting, and my mind was more tired than my body. I didn't even really feel tired until I saw sunlight creeping through the curtains, signaling that I had been up way too long. That was when I would finally close the game, stretch, and shuffle off to bed. The computer was in the family room, right next to the kitchen. It wasn't the most ideal setup if you wanted privacy, but it worked for my family. It was a big family room with old furniture that smelled of worn leather, and the kitchen was always a bit too bright, even when the lights were off. The hallway that led to the back of the house was next to the family room. The house was old, with creaky floors and strange noises at night. Everyone else had already gone to bed. The house was quiet except for the hum of the computer monitor and the occasional sound of a car passing by on the street outside. It was around 2 a.m. I remember it being around that time because I had been playing for hours, the game still loading in front of me as I tried to get a new high score. All the lights in the house were off except for the monitor in front of me, casting a soft glow in the otherwise dark room. The night was thick with silence, a stillness that you can only get in the middle of the night when everyone's asleep. The house felt safe, comforting in a way, like nothing could really happen here. That's when I heard it. At first, it was soft, barely audible. The sound of footsteps. Slow, deliberate, and unmistakably coming from the hallway behind me. My heart immediately started to race. I figured it was my mom. She had a habit of getting up late and wandering around the house when she couldn't sleep. Maybe she was coming out to tell me to go to bed, something she did a lot since I would stay up too late on summer nights. But these footsteps sounded different. I don't know why, but they did. They weren't the usual shuffle of my mom's slippers or the soft padding of her feet. These steps were heavier, more pronounced. I turned my head towards the hallway, trying to see into the dark. The hallway stretched down the back of the house, a narrow passage with faded wallpaper that had been there for as long as I could remember. I put my hand up between the monitor and my eyes so I could block out the bright light and see better into the dark hallway. That's when I saw her, a little girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old. She was walking out of the dark hallway, moving towards the kitchen like she had just woken up in the middle of the night and was wandering around the house. She was barefoot, wearing a simple white nightgown, the kind you see in old pictures from the 50s, the kind that seemed too old-fashioned for a child in this day and age. Her long blonde hair covered her face, the strands falling over her eyes and hiding most of her features. She wasn't walking quickly, just slowly, like she was lost or in a daze. For a moment, I couldn't move. I just stared at her, frozen in place. My mind couldn't process what I was seeing. The girl didn't make a sound. No soft padding of feet on the wooden floor. Just the sound of her steps moving through the silence of the house. She had her head lowered like she was looking at the floor, not paying attention to anything around her. My heart pounded in my chest, and I felt the air in the room get thick, heavier. Then she stopped. She lifted her head, and for a second, I thought she was looking straight at me. Her face was pale, almost too pale, and her eyes, though mostly hidden by her long hair, were dark, empty. I couldn't make out any features clearly, but I could feel her gaze, like something was watching me. I didn't know what to do, didn't know what I was supposed to feel. My body was completely still, but every nerve in me screamed to move, to run. to shout out to anyone who would hear me. But I didn't. The girl didn't stay still for long. She lowered her head again, her hair cascading over her face, and continued walking, her bare feet silent on the floor. She didn't hurry, didn't seem scared, just walked back towards the hallway, moving like she was meant to be there. I don't know how long I stared at her retreating figure, but it felt like an eternity. It was like time was slowing down, like the world had stopped moving, and the only thing that existed was that little girl walking down the hallway. And then came the sound I had been dreading. The floorboard. There was a loose floorboard in the hallway, just a few feet down, and every time someone stepped on it, it creaked loudly, like an old house protesting any weight on it. I had heard that creak countless times before, in the mornings when my parents walked through the house, in the middle of the night when I would go to the bathroom. It was a sound that was so familiar, so common, that it never once bothered me. But hearing it now, as she walked away, was different. It was the unmistakable creak of the floorboard as she stepped on it, her bare feet pressing against the wood. And then she was gone, back into the dark hallway, disappearing as quickly as she had appeared. The house fell back into complete silence. I sat there, still staring at the hallway, my breath coming in shallow gasps. I couldn't process what had just happened. My heart was hammering in my chest, and I felt cold, like I had just seen something I wasn't supposed to. But what was it? Who was that little girl? And why was she in my house in the middle of the night? I don't know how long I sat there, staring into the dark hallway, but it felt like hours. I could still hear my heart thumping in my ears, a loud reminder of how close I had come to something I couldn't explain. The room felt smaller, like the walls were closing in on me, the shadows in the corners of the family room stretching and warping in the dim light of the computer monitor. It felt like the house had shifted somehow, like the air had changed. Finally, after what seemed like forever, I couldn't take it anymore. I turned on every single light in the house. First the family room light, then the kitchen, then the hallway light. One by one, I flicked the switches, almost frantically, as though the light could chase away whatever it was I had just seen. I jumped up from my chair, my legs feeling shaky as I hurried to the kitchen, then to the hallway, making sure every light was on. I checked every corner, every crevice, even the bathroom down the hall, but there was nothing. Nothing but the hum of the lights, the soft click of the light switches, and the thick silence that seemed even heavier now. With my heart still racing, I began to walk back to my bedroom, my mind spinning. I didn't know what to think, didn't know if I should tell my parents, or if they'd just laugh it off as some late-night hallucination. But I couldn't shake the image of that little girl, the way she had moved, the way her head had lifted to look at me. I didn't know if I was supposed to be scared, or if I was just imagining things. But deep down, something about it didn't feel right. As I reached the door to my room, I paused. I took one last look down the hallway, half expecting to see her standing there again. But there was nothing, just the empty hallway, the lights casting long shadows across the walls. I quickly shut the door behind me, locked it, and slid under the covers. My mind raced, but the exhaustion from staying up so late was starting to catch up with me. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, just my imagination, but the nagging feeling in the pit of my stomach wouldn't go away. I kept hearing the creak of that floorboard in my head, over and over again. Eventually, I fell asleep, but it wasn't a peaceful sleep. It was a restless one, filled with strange dreams and the sound of footsteps echoing in the dark. I woke up the next morning, the sun shining brightly through my window, and for a moment, I thought it had all been a bad dream. But when I got up, the lights in the house were still on, and I felt a chill run through me. I didn't tell anyone about what happened that night. I don't know why. Maybe I was too afraid they'd think I was crazy, or maybe I was just trying to forget it. But I never forgot the little girl, the way she moved, the way she looked at me. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that I had seen something I wasn't supposed to. And to this day, I still don't know what it was. The sun was long gone, and the moon hung high above the dense treetops as my family and I settled into our tents for the night. The chill of Yellowstone's mountain air crept through our sleeping bags as we lay there in the near silence of the woods. It had been a long but relatively easy day of hiking, and with another challenging stretch ahead, we all decided to hit the sack early. Our campsite near Shoshone Lake had a perfect view of the clear, star-filled sky, and as I lay there, trying to fall asleep, I thought about how serene everything seemed. But as the minutes ticked by, an odd sensation crept over me. I couldn't put my finger on it. The forest around us was still, almost too still. It was the kind of silence that presses down on you, makes you feel like you're being watched. I shifted in my sleeping bag, brushing the thought away. The whole family was just a few feet away, and despite the strange feeling, I was comfortable with the sound of their soft breathing. Then, the noise came. At first, it was so faint that I thought I was imagining it, but it grew louder, an unmistakable rhythmic thumping. It wasn't a thud or the crash of branches falling. It was a hollow, deep sound that seemed to echo through the trees. I couldn't place it at first. My pulse quickened as I lay there, frozen in the dark. I looked around to see if anyone else had heard it. I wasn't alone. I could hear my sister's muffled whisper from the other tent. She asked the same question we were all thinking. What was that? I didn't answer. I just strained my ears to listen. It was a deep thumping sound, like the rhythmic drumming of something large, echoing through the forest, but it wasn't loud enough to be a bear or any other large animal stomping around. The sound started strong and fast, like something was slamming into the ground with force, and then it tapered off into softer thumps, almost like it was moving away. Are we sure this is just an animal? My brother whispered from the tent next to mine. His voice was tight, and I could hear the unease in it. I wasn't sure. I had been camping for years, but nothing like this had ever happened. The sounds grew faint, stopped for a few moments, and then started again. And then they repeated. Each round seemed to last a minute or two before fading away. I lay there, wide awake now, listening intently. I could hear my family's hushed voices whispering in the distance, each of us exchanging theories about what could be causing the noise. None of the explanations sounded right to me. My sister suggested it was a wild man, some kind of elusive creature, hiding in the forest, waiting for us to come out into the open. Her voice quivered slightly when she said it, but she was trying to hide it. I tried to laugh it off, but the idea lingered in the back of my mind. What if it was something dangerous, something we didn't understand? The thumping continued. It was definitely close by, but still, it didn't sound like a person. I felt the air grow even colder. A sense of dread settled over me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was out there was aware of us, of our presence in the campsite. The longer the thumping continued, the more I felt it creeping into my bones, tightening around my chest. My heart thudded in my ears, matching the beat of the noise outside. Somehow, despite the fear, I eventually drifted into a fitful sleep, the sound of the thumping still echoing in my ears. I don't know what woke me, whether it was the sound itself or the odd sensation that something was lurking just outside the circle of light from our campfire. I lay still, listening, trying to hear anything over the pounding of my heartbeat. The thumping had stopped, but something else seemed to hang in the air. It was a strange, oppressive stillness now. When morning finally arrived, I couldn't help but feel like I had barely slept. My eyes were sore, my mind fuzzy. I crawled out of my tent to the pale light of the sun creeping through the trees. The camp was quiet, too quiet. I saw my family gathered around the fire, looking just as unsettled as I felt. We didn't say much at first, just exchanged tired glances, until finally, my brother broke the silence. You all heard it too, right? There was a murmur of agreement, and we all shared the same uneasy look. None of us had slept soundly, and the sounds from the night before were still fresh in our minds. The air between us was thick with tension. I swear, I thought it was something big, my brother continued, rubbing his eyes. Like a bear or a moose, maybe. But it didn't sound like it was moving, just pounding against something. I heard it too, my sister chimed in. It was like something was banging on a tree. That's when we all realized we had heard the same thing. A deep thudding, the sound of something big, but not quite like anything we had experienced before. We spent the next few minutes discussing the possibilities. Was it a bear, or maybe a bull moose stamping the ground in some territorial display? But none of those explanations felt quite right. There was something odd about the rhythm, the hollow sound of it. Something that didn't sit well with any of us. Later that day, as we hiked deeper into the woods, the unsettling memory of that night hung over us. Every crack of a branch, every rustle of the leaves felt amplified. It was as though we were waiting for something to jump out from the shadows. But as the day wore on, the thought of the strange noise was pushed to the back of my mind. The wilderness had a way of doing that, I suppose. It wasn't until the following day, as we were taking a break near the edge of a small trail, that we ran into another hiker, a seasoned camper who had been out on the trail for weeks. He had a grin on his face when he greeted us, one that was a little too knowing. "You guys camped near Shoshone, right?" he asked, eyeing us with a strange look. "Have you heard the forest grouse?" We exchanged confused glances. The forest grouse? None of us had heard of such a thing. The hiker went on to explain that the mysterious thumping we had heard the night before was likely the mating call of a forest grouse, a bird that inhabits parts of Yellowstone. It only calls on clear, cloudless nights, and the sound it makes is very distinctive, like thumping on hollow logs or trees. "I bet that's what you heard," he said, nodding confidently. "They drum their wings on fallen logs. It can sound pretty eerie if you don't know what it is." The realization hit us all at once, and I felt a mix of relief and embarrassment. It had been nothing more than a bird. A strange bird, certainly, but a bird nonetheless. The way the hiker explained it, it made perfect sense. The thumping, the rhythm, even the way it seemed to fade in and out, it all matched the description of the forest grouse's call. By the time we made camp again that night, we were all in better spirits. The tension that had gripped us on the previous night had mostly faded away, but I couldn't help but still feel a little jumpy every time I heard a rustle in the woods. The wind blew softly through the trees, but I kept listening for that thumping sound. It didn't come. As I lay in my sleeping bag again that night, I realized how easy it had been to let fear get the best of me. But now, understanding what had caused the noise, I could almost laugh at myself. There was nothing to be afraid of. Just the forest, with all its strange sounds and creatures. Yellowstone was full of mysteries, and many of them were far simpler than we imagined. The grouse, I learned, wasn't the only oddity in the woods, but it was definitely the one that scared us the most. Looking back, I still find it hard to believe how much that sound had shaken us. We were in the middle of one of the most beautiful places on Earth, surrounded by nature in all its untamed glory, and yet a simple bird call was enough to make us question everything. As the days passed and we finished our hike around Shoshone Lake, I came to appreciate how little we really understood about the world around us. The wilderness had a way of reminding us that even the most peaceful and breathtaking places could hold their own secrets. And sometimes, the scariest things aren't always what we think they are. When I was 10 years old, I spent a week with my grandmother visiting my uncle. It was during the summer, when school was out, and my parents thought it would be good for me to get out of the city for a while and spend some time in the quiet countryside. My uncle lived in a really old house, the kind with warped floorboards that creaked when you stepped in just the right spots and thick wooden doors that didn't quite close all the way no matter how hard you pushed them. The air always smelled like a mixture of old wood, soil, and something else, like time itself had soaked into the walls. The house sat at the edge of a wide field, and just beyond that, maybe 50 yards away, was an old cemetery. It wasn't big, maybe 20 or 30 headstones, but the stones were tall and weather-worn, some leaning or half sunken into the ground. The dates went back a long way. My uncle said some were Civil War graves, and I remember one in particular that had 1863 carved into it, so clearly it looked like it had just been done the day before. Most of the stones didn't have names I recognized, just initials or faded words that were hard to read. My uncle never made a big deal out of the cemetery. It was just there, part of the land. No fence around it, no signs. It wasn't creepy during the day, just quiet and still like the rest of the place. The days were long and slow out there. My grandmother spent most of her time inside cooking or knitting or reading. My uncle went to work early every morning and came back around dinner. That left me with a lot of time to explore or just sit around. I didn't mind. I spent most of my time on the front porch, either playing with a little set of plastic army men I brought, or swinging gently on the wooden porch swing that hung from the beams by thick chains. The swing faced the gravel driveway and the field that rolled off into the tree line far in the distance. So I'd just sit and watch birds or clouds, or the way the grass moved in the wind. It was on one of those long afternoons when it happened. The sun was high and everything was quiet except for the occasional chirp of a bird or the creak of the swing chains. I was sitting on the swing with one foot on the ground, rocking slowly, watching a beetle crawl across the wooden porch planks. Then, for no reason, I looked up toward the screen door that led into the house. At first, I didn't register what I was seeing. Inside the house, through the screen, I could see someone sitting on the living room couch. The couch sat at an angle, facing toward the fireplace, and the man was sitting on it with his back mostly toward me. I couldn't see his face, but I could clearly make out the dark brown or black hair, short but a little wavy. He was wearing a red and black plaid flannel shirt, the kind with thick fabric and buttons up the front. His shoulders were broad and he sat very still, not fidgeting or looking around, just quietly facing forward. I remember blinking a few times, trying to make sense of it. My uncle was at work. I knew that for sure because I had watched him leave that morning in his old brown pickup truck. And my grandmother didn't own any shirts like that. And besides, the person on the couch had a man's build. I didn't know many adults back then, so I couldn't even guess who it might be. But the strange thing was, I didn't feel scared. I wasn't confused or worried. It was the opposite. There was this calmness that came over me, like a warm blanket had been wrapped around my shoulders. I felt peaceful, like everything was exactly as it should be. I stood up slowly from the swing and walked across the porch to the screen door. The wooden boards creaked under my feet, but I wasn't trying to be quiet. I was just curious. The closer I got, the clearer I could see him. His arm rested along the back of the couch, bent at the elbow. His shirt had those little folds at the shoulder that flannel always gets when someone leans back into the cushions. It didn't feel like I was looking at something strange. It just felt like I was walking into a room with someone I knew, or someone who belonged there. I reached for the handle and pulled open the screen door. It squeaked on its hinge like always, and the moment the door was fully open, he was gone. The couch was empty. Completely. No sound, no movement, just empty space where he had been sitting. I stepped inside, blinking in the dimmer light, and looked around. The room was exactly the same as always. The couch, the little side table with the old brass lamp, the Afghan draped over the armrest. But no man. I stood there for a minute, just staring at the spot where I thought I'd seen him. I didn't feel scared, but I was confused. My brain was trying to make sense of it. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe it had been a shadow, or the back of the couch had somehow looked like a person from the angle I was sitting. I looked back outside to where I had been on the swing and thought maybe the sunlight had played tricks on my eyes. Eventually, I shrugged it off. I was a kid, and kids see strange things all the time. I figured I must have daydreamed it, or let my imagination run off with me. I went back to the porch and started playing with my army men again. I didn't tell my grandmother, didn't mention it to my uncle when he came home. The day moved on just like any other. The rest of the week passed without anything weird happening. I played in the yard, chased bugs, helped my grandmother make cookies, and fell asleep every night to the sounds of cicadas and the old house creaking as it cooled. We visited the cemetery once. My grandmother liked to put flowers on a few of the graves every summer. She never said who they were for, just picked wildflowers and placed them gently on the stones, brushing dirt away with her hand. Eventually the week was over, and my parents came to pick me up. We drove home, and I went back to my usual life. The memory of the man on the couch faded like so many little things do when you're a kid. It didn't bother me, didn't keep me up at night. I just sort of forgot it happened. Years went by. I grew up, went to high school, then college, got a job, got married. Life kept moving. My uncle eventually moved out of that old house and into a smaller place closer to town when he got older. I heard the land was still in the family, but no one really used the house anymore. I hadn't thought about that week in years, decades even, until something brought it all back in a way I never saw coming. It was a regular Saturday evening. We had my uncle over for dinner. My wife had made a big roast with potatoes and carrots, and the whole house smelled like home. My uncle was older now, gray at the temples, a little slower in his movements, but still sharp as ever. We were sitting around the table after dinner, sipping wine and telling stories. The kind of night that feels warm and easy. The topic drifted toward old family places and strange memories. Someone mentioned ghosts or something weird they saw once, and my uncle chuckled and said, almost casually, that he always thought that old house of his had a bit of a presence, as he put it. Not in a scary way, just something. He said that every so often, when he was alone, he'd catch a glimpse of a man out of the corner of his eye. Always the same, dark hair, red and black plaid shirt. Never doing anything, just there for a moment, and then gone. The second he said those words, I felt a chill go through my whole body. It was like something ancient had stirred in the back of my mind. I hadn't thought about it in so long, hadn't even remembered it existed. But in that instant, it came back clear as day. The porch swing, the warm air, the man on the couch, the shirt. My hand jerked, and my fork slipped from my fingers and clattered loudly onto my plate. Everyone turned to look at me. I was staring at my uncle, my mouth open slightly. My wife touched my arm and asked if I was okay, but I couldn't answer at first. I was too deep in the memory. My skin felt cold, and I realized I was pale. The room seemed to go quieter, like even the walls were waiting for me to say something. Eventually, I told them what I had seen. I told them about that afternoon on the porch, about seeing the man through the screen, about the shirt, the hair, how calm I had felt, and how he vanished the moment I opened the door. I left out the part about the peacefulness at first, but my uncle nodded as I spoke. He didn't look surprised. If anything, he looked relieved, like someone else finally understood. He said that was exactly how it always felt to him, too. Calm, peaceful, like whoever it was wasn't there to scare him, just to be there. Like a presence, not an intruder. That night after everyone had gone to bed, I stayed up for a while thinking about it. It was hard to explain, even to myself. I wasn't afraid. I didn't believe in ghosts, not really, and even if I did, there was nothing scary about this memory. It was just strange, unexplainable, a shared moment across decades, a detail so specific, so odd, that it couldn't have been a coincidence. Red and black plaid, the hair, the posture. I don't know what I saw that day, and I'll never know. Maybe it was a real person who left so fast I never heard them. Maybe I imagined it. Maybe my brain filled in a shape from a shadow and made it something familiar. Maybe the house had some effect on people, old wood, old air, silence. The mind does strange things, especially when it's young. But what stayed with me wasn't the image of the man, or even the moment itself. It was the feeling, that calm, peaceful stillness that settled over me when I saw him. That has never left me. Even now, when I think about that house, or sit quietly in the evening light with a soft breeze blowing, I feel that same quiet peace. I don't think it was something dangerous or dark. I think whatever it was, it belonged there. Maybe it was just something left behind by all the time that house had seen. Echoes of quiet lives, stillness that settles in the cracks of old walls. Some things don't need answers. They just are. It was late one night when I was about 15. My best friend and I were sitting outside on the curb in front of my house, sneaking cigarettes and sharing a beer. You know, the usual rebellious teenager stuff. I don't remember exactly what time it was, but it was already pitch black outside. The air was thick with that late-night stillness, the kind that feels eerie when you're out of sight of the streetlights. I lived in a large housing development, kind of at the edge, right next to the woods. My street had houses on both sides, but the ones across from mine had nothing but thick forest behind them. It was a strange mix of suburban neighborhood and wilderness, and honestly, that was the part that made it feel kind of unsettling sometimes. That night, my friend and I were just hanging out, making the most of our teenage rebellion. The sounds of the neighborhood were familiar. Dogs barking in the distance, the occasional car driving by, the rustling of leaves. Nothing out of the ordinary at all. But then, without warning, something happened that changed everything. A terrifying screeching sound ripped through the night. It wasn't like anything I'd ever heard before. It wasn't an animal I recognized, and it wasn't something that sounded natural. It was like the scream of something ancient, primal, and it made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. My friend and I both froze, staring at each other, trying to make sense of what we just heard. There was no mistaking it. The sound was coming from the woods across the street. I don't know what possessed us, but the second we heard that scream, we were both up and running, without even thinking about the beer or the cigarettes we had left on the curb. We rushed inside the house, slamming the door behind us, and we immediately locked all the windows. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us. I mean, I knew it was stupid to be scared, but that sound, it had just felt wrong. We stayed by the window, trying to figure out what was going on, but the whole time, we had that uncomfortable feeling in our guts like someone, or something, was still watching us. The house felt suffocating, like the walls were closing in. That's when I realized the curtains in the front window weren't drawn, so we shut them quickly, feeling a little safer, but not by much. At this point, we both kind of agreed that we had to walk my friend home. We'd done it plenty of times before, but something about tonight felt different. My friend lived in a development on the other side of the neighborhood, and to get there, we had to walk out of my neighborhood, then through a bigger one with houses spaced far apart, and then take a shortcut through some woods. It was about a 20-minute walk, all uphill and pitch black. Neither of us wanted to do it, but we knew we had no choice. We waited for what felt like an eternity before we finally decided to leave. We figured we'd wait for the adrenaline to die down a little, and that by then, we'd be in the clear. But as soon as we stepped outside, the fear crept right back into our bones. The air was heavy, and I felt the weight of the darkness pressing in around us. The streets were empty, no cars, no sounds, just the faint rustling of the leaves. It felt wrong. We both felt it. As we walked, the forest loomed on one side, and even though we tried to ignore it, we both kept glancing over our shoulders, convinced that someone was following us. Every snap of a twig, every crunch of leaves underfoot made my heart race. I remember asking myself over and over why it had to be this way. Why did we have to be so stupid? We were just a couple of dumb teenagers, out there in the dark, without any real sense of danger. But something about tonight wasn't right. The further we walked, the more convinced I became that we were being watched. At first, it was just my imagination. I'd hear a noise, maybe a branch shifting in the breeze, and I'd convince myself it was just that. But after a while, it didn't feel like I was imagining things anymore. We kept hearing footsteps behind us, soft but deliberate. Not our own, though. I was certain of that. It was like something, or someone was tailing us, staying just far enough back that we couldn't see it. We tried to shake it off. We told ourselves it was just the dark playing tricks on us. But the noises didn't stop. In fact, they seemed to get closer. Leaves crunched just a little too loudly. Twigs snapped just a little too sharply. We even tried talking, but the words came out hollow and unconvincing, like we were trying to comfort ourselves with things we didn't truly believe. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, we reached the shortcut. This was the part of the walk that scared me the most, but it was also the quickest way to get her home. The woods here were dense and tangled, and there was this makeshift bridge that led across a small creek. It was dark and narrow, and I always felt uneasy walking over it. I pulled out my old ENV Verizon cell phone, which at the time was pretty much the best phone you could get, flipping it open to use as a flashlight. The dim light barely cut through the darkness, but it was enough for us to see the path ahead. We both kept looking behind us, trying to shake the feeling of being watched. It was silent now, too silent. All I could hear was the sound of my feet shuffling through the leaves, my breath coming in short, nervous bursts. Halfway through the shortcut, that's when it happened. I saw them, two huge, glowing green eyes. At first, I thought they were just reflections from the phone's light, but as I focused, I realized those eyes weren't just glowing, they were alive. And they were way too high off the ground to be a deer, or anything else I recognized. They were enormous, and they were staring right at us. My heart stopped. I could feel my chest tightening, like the air was being sucked out of me. I froze. My friend, on the other hand, let out a small gasp, and I knew she saw it too. For a split second, I couldn't move, couldn't think. All I could do was stare at those eyes. They didn't blink. They just watched us. The noise behind us stopped too. The footsteps, the rustling, everything just went still. But those eyes didn't move. I wanted to scream, but my voice felt stuck in my throat. Everything inside me was telling me to run, but my legs felt like they were made of stone. Then, without warning, something shifted in the shadows. The creature, I don't even know what it was, moved. It didn't leap, but it seemed to glide slowly closer to us. The eyes never left us, and I knew we had to get out of there fast. My friend and I didn't say a word. There was no time for words. We both turned and bolted, running as fast as we could down the path. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might explode. I could hear the sound of twigs breaking, leaves crunching in the distance, but I didn't dare look back. The whole way down, I felt like I was going to trip, like something would reach out of the darkness and grab me. But I kept running, the only thing in my mind being to get back to my house, where I could lock myself in and pretend like it was all just a bad dream. Somehow, I made it back to my house. My legs were sore, and my lungs burned from running, but I was there. I stumbled through the door, slammed it behind me, and locked it as quickly as I could. I didn't even know what to say to my parents. What was I supposed to say? That we were being chased by something in the woods. I don't even know what we saw, but I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever it was, it had been hunting us. I never did walk that shortcut again. My friend and I both carried mace after that, just in case. We were never sure what we saw that night. I've always thought it was probably a mountain lion. After all, the behavior, the scream, the eyes, it all fit. But the weird part is, there are no confirmed mountain lions in that area anymore. The last one was killed off decades ago, according to local wildlife officials. But that doesn't matter. We both know what we felt that night. We felt like prey. And that's something you never forget. Even now, when I walk through the woods around my house, I can't shake the feeling that something's out there watching. And every time I hear a twig snap in the dark, I can't help but wonder if I'm being followed again. I try not to let it bother me, but I know that deep down, there's something in the woods. Something that knows how to move silently, how to stalk. Something that could be watching right now, waiting for the next unsuspecting soul to wander too close. I never take the woods lightly anymore, and I always carry mace. Always. When I was really young, maybe about 4 or 5, I remember waking up in the middle of the night. The room was dark, but not pitch black. There was enough moonlight coming through the window to see the outline of everything. I was in my parents' room, in the big bed where I sometimes slept when I had nightmares or couldn't fall asleep on my own. I don't know why I was awake that night, but I know I wasn't scared at first. I was just lying there, looking at the shadows, the familiar hum of the night surrounding me. That's when I saw it. It wasn't a human, but it wasn't an animal either. It was like a shadow, tall, but it had a presence, something more than just an absence of light. It was crouching by the edge of the bed, in the corner of the room. I could see its form clearly enough to know it wasn't normal. It had these long, spindly limbs, like twisted branches reaching out from its body, and its skin, or what I thought was skin, was a dark reddish color. There was something about its face too. I remember thinking that its eyes were too big and too dark, like 2 black pits that didn't reflect anything. It didn't have a mouth, not that I could see, but it was like it was staring into me, and I could feel something in the room shift. It felt off, but not in a way that made me panic. I didn't think it was dangerous. I didn't really know what it was, but I was too young to be afraid of something like that, at least not right away. I just watched it for a while. I couldn't move my eyes away, but I wasn't frozen or paralyzed. I could still move. I could still breathe. It wasn't like what people talk about with sleep paralysis, where your body is trapped but your mind is awake. I wasn't trapped. I just didn't know what to do. I didn't call out to my parents or scream. I didn't feel the need to. Maybe it's because I didn't associate things that looked scary as bad yet. My world wasn't full of those ideas yet. I just stared at it. The creature didn't move much, but it seemed aware of me. It shifted its posture slightly, like it was studying me. I couldn't hear it breathe or make any noise, but it still felt like there was something in the air, like the weight of its gaze was heavy, pressing down on me, but not in a way that hurt. It was like it was waiting for me to make the next move. I don't know how long I stayed there, looking at it. It felt like minutes, but also like an eternity. Eventually, I blinked, and it was gone. Just like that. I remember being confused because I didn't feel scared when it disappeared. I just felt like something had changed, but I didn't really understand what that change was. I lay there for a while longer before finally closing my eyes and falling back to sleep. When I woke up the next morning, I didn't tell anyone about it. It wasn't something I had the words for. I don't know if it was a dream or not. It didn't feel like a dream, though. It was too vivid, too real, but I never really thought about it much after that. I guess I just put it out of my mind and moved on like kids do, but in the back of my mind, there was always this tiny piece of uncertainty about what I had seen that night. Years went by, and I moved out of my parents' house and started living on my own. For a while, life was pretty normal. I wasn't really one to dwell on strange occurrences. But things started to change when I moved into my new apartment. It wasn't long after I moved in that the nightmares started. They were always the same, or at least they felt the same. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, sweating, my heart pounding, unable to shake the feeling that something was wrong. I saw a girl, a very young girl, standing in the bathroom. I could never see her face clearly, just the dark outline of her body, her arms limp by her sides, the faintest hints of her long hair hanging in front of her face. She was always there, always standing perfectly still. And every time I woke up from it, I would feel like something had been left in the air. It wasn't until later that I realized what she was doing. She had hung herself in my bathroom. It didn't make sense, and I didn't understand it. I had no idea why this girl would keep showing up in my dreams or in my waking moments, but it was real enough for me to feel the fear, even when I knew I was just dreaming. The worst part was that it wasn't only in my dreams. I would wake up in the middle of the day, doing something mundane, like making coffee or watching TV, and I would see her. Her shadow would appear in the corner of my eye, just enough for me to catch a glimpse of her. I'd look, but she'd be gone, vanishing as quickly as she had appeared. It didn't stop there. After a while, it felt like things started to shift in the apartment. At first, I thought I was imagining it. I'd hear noises, creaks, the sound of footsteps in the hallway when no one was there, a whisper of movement behind me when I was alone. I tried to brush it off. I'd laugh it off with friends, saying it was just an old building settling or my mind playing tricks on me. But that was just me making excuses for things I couldn't explain. The weirdest part started when I decided to move out. It wasn't even something I had planned for long. I just had this overwhelming feeling that I needed to get out, to start fresh somewhere else. So I started packing, getting ready to leave in a couple of days. That's when things really got strange. One day, I was sitting on the couch, and I watched as the closet door slowly creaked open. At first, I thought it was just the wind or something else, something logical, something that could be explained. But then it happened again, and again. The door would open on its own, and I wasn't even near it. Every time I would go over and close it, thinking maybe I hadn't locked it properly, it would open again, as if something was trying to get out. I tried to ignore it, but it only got worse. The bags in my kitchen, the ones I'd left on the counter, would start to shift, as if someone was moving them around. I could hear the rustling of plastic, the faint sound of movement, but no one was there. I'd watch it happen in front of my eyes, feeling that uncomfortable prickling sensation on the back of my neck. I tried to tell myself I was just imagining things, but deep down, I knew I wasn't. It wasn't just the bags. The comforter on my bed would shift too, as if someone was tugging on it. It wasn't like I had the fan on, or that it was blowing from the air conditioning. It was just moving on its own. And then came the mirrors. One night, I went to the bathroom, and I looked at myself in the mirror, just to check if everything was okay. But when I looked up, I didn't see just me. There were shadows that shouldn't have been there, figures standing just behind me, in the reflection. I turned around quickly, expecting someone to be there, but the bathroom was empty. I didn't know what to make of it. I was starting to feel like I was losing my grip on reality. The worst part came last night. I don't know if it was a dream or if it really happened, but it felt so real. I woke up in the middle of the night, feeling disoriented. I got out of bed, but the second my feet hit the floor, I lost my balance. I fell, hard, hitting the floor with my hands outstretched. I remember feeling like I couldn't breathe, like my body was locking up. I couldn't move. My muscles seized up, and I felt like I was suffocating. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. It felt like a seizure, but I've never had one before. When I finally managed to move again, I was shaking, and my body was covered in sweat. But it didn't feel like a seizure. It felt like something had taken control of me. I didn't sleep much after that. I stayed up for hours, wide awake, staring at the walls. The air felt thick, suffocating, like it was pressing in on me. The whole place felt wrong, like something was pushing back against me, against my presence there. 2 days left. I can't wait to leave, to get out of this place. But at the same time, I feel like something is waiting, watching. I'm not sure if I'll ever feel completely free of whatever is here. Maybe it's just a coincidence, maybe it's all in my head, but I can't shake the feeling that this thing, this presence, doesn't want me to leave. It's like it's angry that I'm leaving, that I'm escaping it. I'll be gone soon. I'll be out of here. But I can't shake the thought that maybe the hardest part is yet to come. I'll never forget the feeling of being trapped here, and I don't think it's something I'll be able to leave behind so easily. It was one of those long afternoons when everything just felt heavy. Not because I had done anything particularly exhausting, but because the day had that quiet, dragging kind of stillness that comes after a stretch of sleepless nights. I hadn't been sleeping well for a while. Too much time scrolling, too much thinking. My schedule had been wrecked, flipped inside out. So by the time 4 p.m. rolled around, I gave in. The sunlight had already started to dip behind the buildings, and the shadows in my room grew long, making everything feel slower, like the air itself had thickened. I pulled the curtains together so there was just a thin crack letting in a pale sliver of light, then lay down on my bed. My room was silent except for the faint hum of the electric fan. The air felt stale, maybe from the closed window, or maybe from being inside too long. I lay there on my back, arms resting beside me, and let myself sink. I didn't plan on sleeping. I just wanted to rest my eyes for a few minutes. But I knew in the back of my mind that this kind of late nap always came with strange dreams. It wasn't the first time something like that had happened. Lucid dreams weren't new to me. I used to practice them on purpose, keeping journals, doing reality checks. I liked the control, the awareness, the strange feeling of being able to shape what was happening around me. But it had been a while since I'd had a clear one, and even longer since I actually wanted one. They had started to get weird, darker, more chaotic, less like dreams and more like tests. This time, it started gradually. I remember the weight first. That feeling of pressure, like someone had piled something thick and invisible on my chest and limbs. My eyes were closed, but I could feel everything. I knew I was still lying in my bed. I knew I hadn't moved. The blanket pressed around me, but it wasn't tucked in tightly. The mattress felt soft, my skin was warm, and yet I couldn't move. Not even my fingers. That was the first red flag. Usually in lucid dreams, once I realized I was dreaming, I had a moment of control. But this time, the moment I realized what was happening, I didn't feel any sense of power or calm. Instead, I felt small, very small. And then it changed. My room didn't shift dramatically. It didn't melt or distort like in most dreams. It stayed exactly the same. My desk in the corner, the unwashed mug, the clothes half-stuffed into drawers. But the darkness was thicker, like the shadows were alive. The part of the room that wasn't touched by the slice of light from the curtain turned pitch black, and not in the way night feels black, but like a kind of hole in the world. And then I saw them, dark shapes, not exactly human-shaped, not exactly anything. They didn't walk or float or make noise, but they were there, moving, slow and deliberate. They came one by one, each stepping into view like they were waiting their turn. Each one stood beside my bed, looking down at me. No faces, no voices. Just this sense of inspection, like I was on display. Their presence was overwhelming. Cold. Wrong. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. I tried to twitch a muscle, even a toe, but I was locked in. Everything inside me screamed to move, to get up, to do something, but I couldn't. My eyes were open in the dream. I was sure of it. I could see the ceiling. I could see the fan. I could see the edge of my blanket. And then one of them leaned in closer. Unlike the others, this one didn't just look. It reached out, slow and certain, and placed something that felt like a hand, if you could call it that, against my face. The sensation was bizarre, cold and dry and unfamiliar. It pressed gently on my cheek, then gripped my jaw, slowly tilting my face side to side like someone checking a mannequin. I couldn't understand it. It wasn't violent, but it was deeply wrong, like it was trying to decide something. Something in me snapped. That raw, primal panic. I told myself I had to wake up, that if I just moved, even an inch, I could break free. I concentrated everything into trying to move a finger, a hand, my neck, anything. And then suddenly I did. I sat up. The weight lifted instantly, like someone had thrown open a window. I was sitting upright in my bed, breath ragged, heart racing. The room was still dark but calm. The shadows were just shadows. I thought I had made it out. But then I looked to my right. And that's when the real terror hit me. I was still there, lying down. My body was still lying on the bed beside me, eyes shut, completely still. I stared at myself, and my mind went blank. There was no logic, no explanation. I had sat up, I was moving, I could feel the sheets under me. And yet there I was motionless. Before I could process it, the shadows swarmed. Not walking, not approaching like before. They moved all at once. A flood of blackness crashing inward toward the bed, toward my body still lying there. They moved like liquid, like smoke, filling every inch of space around my motionless form. I panicked. I didn't think. I just dropped back down, trying to merge with myself again, to get back in, whatever that meant. My head hit the pillow, and I squeezed my eyes shut, praying hard, trying to force movement, trying to wake myself for real. And then silence. Real silence. I woke up properly, heart pounding so hard I thought I might throw up. My limbs felt like they had been underwater. I lay still, staring at the ceiling, my breath shaky. I couldn't tell how long I'd been asleep. It felt like hours, but when I checked the clock, only 20 minutes had passed. Everything looked the same. The crack of light through the curtain, the hum of the fan. But the feeling was different. The air was heavier than before. I sat up slowly, afraid I might still see myself lying there. But I didn't. Just the blanket, slightly rumpled where I had been. I didn't move for a long time. I just sat there on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor. My hands were trembling slightly, but I wasn't cold. I wasn't even sure what I was feeling. I just knew something had happened, something that went beyond a normal dream or even a lucid one. That night, I didn't sleep. Not because I couldn't, but because I didn't want to. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt the weight again. Not physical, but something deeper. Like my body was ready to slip out again, whether I wanted it to or not. In the days that followed, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I had just fallen into a deep lucid dream and gotten stuck in sleep paralysis. Maybe my brain had mixed REM stages and created the illusion of an out-of-body experience. Maybe it was just a coincidence that I saw myself. Maybe the shadows were a trick of my mind. Maybe. But even now, years later, I still remember every second of it. The feeling of being touched. The way the room looked exactly the same. The sound of nothing at all. I never got an answer. I stopped taking naps after that. And I stopped trying to lucid dream. When I was 12, my life was in the middle of a huge change. My dad and stepmom were about to have their first child together, and our family was in the process of moving into a new house. This house was old, built in the 1890s, and had a lot of character. My dad was always a handyman, and over the years, he'd done a lot of remodeling on the place. There were patches of freshly painted walls next to old exposed wood beams. The place had a strange charm, but it also felt off. The house had a dark history, but none of us knew much about it when we moved in. The more we settled, though, the more I felt like something was wrong. My dad had spent hours working on it before we officially moved in. One afternoon, he came into the living room holding a small, old rocking horse he'd found hidden in a pantry under the staircase. The pantry was sealed off with a heavy wooden door, and he'd spent a whole day getting it open. He told us it was an old toy, something from decades ago. I remember the rocking horse was made of wood, and the paint was chipped and faded. It looked like something a child from another time would play with, but it was the kind of thing that looked like it belonged to an earlier era, not the 1950s or 60s. My dad brushed it off as nothing, just an old relic, but there was something unsettling about it. When we moved in, it was just a relief to finally be settled. My brother was born about a week after we finished the move, and it felt like everything was falling into place. At first, it was just like any other house. Quiet, peaceful, and normal. My brother, who was named Josh, was a tiny little thing, just like any baby, and I was content to spend my time playing outside or hanging out with my friends. But soon after Josh started growing, things got weird. It started small. At first, I noticed the rocking chair in his nursery. It would move when no one was around. At first, I thought it was just the house settling, or maybe even a draft moving it. But I started paying more attention, and sure enough, every time I would go into his room, that chair would be moving, slowly rocking back and forth. It wasn't a huge movement, but enough to be noticeable. My dad said it was probably just the foundation shifting, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't the foundation at all. Then, as Josh got older, the weird things started happening more frequently. I'd be in the living room, watching TV or reading a book, and I could hear Josh babbling, but he wasn't talking to anyone. He would make the kind of baby noises that didn't seem directed at anyone, like he was interacting with an invisible person. I tried to brush it off as him just being a baby, but it felt off. One night, after everyone had gone to bed, I was walking down the hallway toward my room when I heard the faintest sound, a soft cooing, almost like someone was speaking to him, but there was no one in his room. I froze in the hallway, my heart pounding in my chest. I quietly crept down the hall and peeked around the corner. I could see Josh in his crib, his tiny arms flailing around, but there was no one else in the room. It didn't stop there. Whenever I went to get him up in the morning, the scent of perfume would be so strong around him. It wasn't just any perfume, though. It was heavy, like an old-fashioned scent that you might expect from a grandmother's dresser. The smell would cling to him, even though my stepmom never wore anything like it. The perfume would be so strong that it would linger in the room long after I'd picked him up, and I started wondering if I was just imagining things. But after a while, it started happening too often to ignore. I mentioned it to my dad once, but he didn't seem to think anything of it. He just laughed and said that maybe Josh was just getting into things, or that the old house had a way of making things smell strange. But my stepmom, who had always been a little more in tune with things, seemed to notice it too. She told me one day that she thought it might be the spirit of a woman who once lived in the house. She explained that the house had been owned by a couple in the 1950s, a couple who couldn't have children of their own. The wife, whose name was Clara, had passed away in the house, and my stepmom believed she might still be there, lingering, unable to let go. My stepmom thought that maybe Clara's spirit had been drawn to Josh, especially since she had never had children of her own. It felt like the most ridiculous thing I'd ever heard, and I pushed the thought out of my mind. But things kept happening. The scent of perfume wasn't the only strange occurrence. One night, when Josh was about a year old, my stepmom and I went into his room to check on him. He was asleep in his crib, but there was something strange about the way he was lying there. His body was stiff, his arms straight at his sides like someone had placed him there perfectly, almost like he had been moved while we weren't looking. Neither of us had touched him, and we couldn't explain how it had happened. We did some research on the house and found that Clara had died there just a few years before we moved in. She had passed away in the very room that Josh now slept in. The more we dug into the history, the more we learned that Clara and her husband had never had children. They had tried for years but had never been able to have a baby, and when Clara died, she was still grieving the fact that she never got to experience motherhood. After that, we didn't know what to think. My dad still didn't believe in anything supernatural, but my stepmom was convinced that Clara's spirit was somehow attached to the house. She thought that maybe Josh had brought some kind of peace to her, that he was giving her something she had never had, a child of her own. It wasn't just the rocking chair or the scent of perfume. We started noticing other strange things too. I would walk into Josh's room and hear soft whispers, almost like someone was speaking in hushed tones. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but it kept happening. Sometimes I'd hear things from the corner of the room when I was alone with him. I couldn't see anything, but the sounds were unmistakable. Then, just as suddenly as everything had started, it stopped. Josh turned to, and the strange happenings came to an abrupt halt. The rocking chair stopped moving, the scent of perfume disappeared, and I never heard the whispers again. It was as if the house had finally quieted down. My stepmom swears to this day that it was Clara's spirit, and that Josh helped her find peace. I can't say for sure whether I believe that or not, but I do know that after Josh turned 2, everything returned to normal. It's been years now, and I don't think about the old house much anymore. We eventually moved to a new place, and my dad sold the house. I still sometimes think about the old rocking horse that my dad found under the staircase. I never did figure out why it was there, or who it belonged to, but I don't need to know. What I do know is that for a time, something strange happened in that house. Whether it was the house settling or something else entirely, I'll never know for sure. But it's a part of my story, one that I can't forget. And in some way, I think I'll always remember that old house, the strange things that happened there, and how we all lived through it together. It was a Saturday afternoon, a perfect day to go exploring. My friends, Jake and Sam, and I were 12 years old, full of energy, ready to make memories that, at the time, seemed like they would last forever. We lived in a small town with just enough freedom to roam, but not so much that we ever really worried about much. The sun was hanging low in the sky, casting long shadows along the quiet streets and into the woods. We had been hanging out on a small walking trail just off the main road for hours. It was the kind of trail that wound through a thicket of trees and brush, barely wide enough for a bike to pass through, but perfect for a group of kids to sneak around and explore. We had already played around for a while, but now we were standing on a little clearing near the trail, not sure what to do next. There were a few options in front of us, but none of them seemed exciting enough to hold our attention. We tossed around a couple of ideas. Maybe ride our bikes to the old bridge down the road, or head toward the park to find something to do. But something felt off. We didn't really know why, but it was like a little prickling feeling on the back of my neck. That's when we saw him. He wasn't anything remarkable at first glance. Just a man, maybe in his 40s, wearing a long, dark trench coat. He wasn't walking on the trail at all. Instead, he was on the other side of the road, near the guardrail that separated the trail from the main road. He seemed out of place, like he didn't belong here at all. It was weird to see someone out in the woods like this. Maybe he was just passing through, but there was something about the way he moved that made my stomach tighten. He jumped over the guardrail with a strange ease, landing softly on the ground. Then, he started walking toward us. At first, I thought maybe he was just taking a shortcut, or maybe he was someone's dad out looking for his kid. But the longer I looked, the more unsettled I became. There was something wrong about him. He looked unkempt, like he hadn't bothered to shower or even take care of himself in a while. His coat was worn at the edges, fraying slightly as he walked, and his face was gaunt, like he hadn't eaten properly in days. It wasn't just his appearance, though. It was the way he walked, like he was moving with a purpose, but it wasn't clear what that purpose was. He wasn't just walking toward us. He was coming straight for us, and that made the hairs on my neck stand up. I looked at Jake and Sam, and their faces mirrored my own unease. We didn't speak, but I could tell they were both feeling the same thing I was. The world around us seemed to freeze for a second, and then we all seemed to come to the same conclusion at the same time. This was bad. Really bad. I don't know what it was about him that made me so sure we needed to get out of there. Maybe it was the way he was looking at us as he approached, like he already knew who we were and what we were doing there. It was as if he had been watching us for a while, and now he was just closing in for whatever came next. Then, just as we started to turn to leave, the man spoke. His voice was raspy, like he hadn't used it in a long time, and his words sent a chill down my spine. "Haven't seen you guys in a while." It didn't sound like he was saying it in a friendly way. It didn't sound like a coincidence. It sounded personal, like he had been keeping track of us. I froze for a split second, the weight of those words hitting me all at once. Without thinking, we all turned and bolted. We didn't even talk to each other. It was like a reflex, all of us starting to run at the same time, our legs moving as fast as they could, adrenaline pumping through our bodies. We were trying to get out of there, but my heart was pounding so hard that I could barely hear anything else. I glanced over my shoulder once and saw him still walking toward us, not running, just steadily moving forward with a slow, deliberate pace. I pushed myself harder, my feet pounding against the ground, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The woods around us seemed to blur as we made our way down the path, trying to find a way out, any way out. But then, just as I turned my head to check behind me, I hit something. It was a tree root, thick, twisted, and right in my path. My foot caught on it, and everything seemed to happen in slow motion as I went down hard. The pain in my elbow shot through my body as I hit the ground. I didn't even scream. I just gasped, feeling the sharp impact in my arm, my skin scraping against the rough ground. Blood started to trickle down my arm from the cut, but I didn't even notice. My mind was focused on one thing. The man. I looked back, and there he was, still coming toward me, still walking, and it felt like he was getting closer, not running, just moving with that same unnatural pace. My heart dropped into my stomach. I felt frozen, like I couldn't move, like I was about to die. I pushed myself up, ignoring the pain in my elbow. I couldn't stay there. I couldn't let him catch me. I looked at my friends, who were already ahead of me, their faces filled with terror. I ran again, pain shooting up my arm with every step, but I had no choice. I caught up with Jake and Sam, blood still dripping from my elbow, but none of us stopped. We kept running, not looking back until we reached the main road. I couldn't hear the man anymore, but that didn't mean he wasn't still following us. We slowed down once we hit the pavement, hoping we'd lost him. The cars passed by without slowing, and the streetlights cast a faint glow over everything, but it felt like we were safe for the moment. Just as we were about to turn and head toward the nearby deli, we saw him again. The man was standing in the shadows, about 100 feet away, just watching us. I froze again, my heart slamming against my chest. There was no way we had lost him. It was like he had been waiting for us to make a mistake. He was just standing there, still in that trench coat, not moving a muscle. I looked at Jake and Sam, and I saw the panic on their faces too. We turned and sprinted toward the deli down the street. The door was just a few feet away, and I pushed it open as hard as I could, slamming it behind me as we bolted inside. We ran to the back of the store and hid behind some shelves, trying to calm down. I could hear my heart beating in my ears, and I could feel my elbow pulsing from the cut. We pressed ourselves against the shelves, barely breathing, just watching the door. We were all too afraid to say anything. The bell above the door rang again. I looked up, and there he was, his face peering around the corner of the doorframe. He had followed us inside. My stomach dropped. "Help," Sam whispered, and we both stared at the deli counter, hoping someone would notice. One of the workers finally looked over, saw the panic in our faces, and grabbed a knife from under the counter. He went out the door, his body blocking the man from coming any closer. It wasn't much, but it was enough to slow him down for a second. I don't know what happened after that, I don't know what the guy said or did, but I heard him arguing with the worker, and I could barely make sense of it. But then, I heard a car pull up outside, and a familiar voice called out to us. It was Sam's dad. The man hadn't followed us into the store yet, and when I saw Sam's dad walk in, I felt a huge wave of relief. He took us out the back way, and we got into his car without looking back. As we drove away, my heart still racing, I glanced out the window one last time. The man was standing outside the deli, his trench coat blowing in the wind. But what caught my eye was the long, dark blade hanging from the inside of his coat, a machete, huge and glinting in the light. And in that moment, I realized just how close we had come to something terrible. We didn't stop until we were back at Sam's house. I still couldn't shake the image of that man standing there, watching us. The whole thing felt unreal, like something out of a nightmare, but it had been real. It had been way too real. We didn't talk much after that. We didn't even go back to that trail again. It felt like a lifetime had passed since that afternoon, but I could still remember every detail clearly. That guy had been close, too close, and for the first time, I understood what it meant to really be scared. I remember it like it was yesterday, the rain pouring down, the dark woods surrounding me on all sides, and that strange sense of unease that never seemed to leave me that night. I was a teenager then, maybe 16 or 17, and when you're that age, everything feels like an adventure. It doesn't matter if it's a stupid idea. It doesn't matter if you're terrified. You do it because you think you're invincible, that nothing can hurt you. That night, I was with a boy I liked, and we were looking for a place to get away from everything, away from parents, away from rules. A secluded cabin deep in the woods seemed like the perfect spot. My house was in a rural area, nothing around for miles except trees and fields. The kind of place where the nearest neighbor was far enough away that you couldn't even see their lights at night. So when I snuck out, I wasn't really worried about being caught. I had made sure to grab a jacket and some snacks, and the boy, whose name was Adam, had a joint rolled and ready to go. It seemed like it would be a fun, carefree night. Just the two of us in the woods, no one else around. The rain had started when we left, light at first, but soon enough, it turned into a steady downpour, the kind that soaked you through no matter how fast you moved. We were soaked by the time we made it to the cabin. The walk was about a mile, and by the time we arrived, I was already feeling the creeping discomfort in the pit of my stomach. It didn't help that I could barely see in front of me. The forest was dark and thick, and the rain didn't make it any easier to find our way. But we kept going. The cabin looked just like something you'd expect to find in the middle of nowhere. A small, abandoned structure with rotting wood, no lights, and a door that was hanging slightly ajar. There wasn't even a path leading up to it. It was so isolated that it felt like we were the first people to stumble across it in years, maybe decades. Still, I didn't think too much of it. We were here, and I just wanted to enjoy the night. We made our way inside, and I remember the air being heavy, damp, and stale. I flicked the light switch, but it didn't work, so we pulled out our phones for light. The inside of the cabin wasn't much better than the outside. If anything, it felt more oppressive. There were cobwebs in the corners, and dust covered everything. The walls were lined with old, peeling wallpaper, and the floor creaked beneath our feet as we stepped further inside. A small wood stove sat in one corner, and a couple of old chairs surrounded it, as if someone had used to sit there and watch the fire. But everything felt wrong. The weirdest thing, though, was what we found in the middle of the room. It wasn't just the typical junk you'd expect to find in a place like this. Old furniture, maybe a broken chair or two. No, there was something that made my stomach churn when I saw it. A small calf, dead. It was lying in the center of the room, its bones exposed, its skin stretched tight over them. The thing was so dry, it looked like a skeleton wrapped in leather. It didn't smell. I had expected it to smell, considering how long it must have been there. But there was nothing, just a faint earthy scent, like the smell of the forest outside. It wasn't fresh death, but something that had been dead for a long time. Adam noticed it too. We both just stood there, staring at it for a long time. It wasn't just unsettling, it was wrong. Who puts a dead animal in the middle of a cabin like this? There were no other cows around. No pasture, no farm, nothing nearby. The cabin didn't even look like it was on any kind of farm or ranch. It was just in the woods, isolated, a place no one would think to go unless they were looking for something, or running from something. I asked Adam if he thought it had just died there, but but he wasn't sure either. We didn't really talk much after that. The idea of touching the thing made me sick. It was like some twisted, macabre thing to just leave a calf in there like that. It wasn't even hidden, it was just out in the open, as if someone wanted us to find it, like it was placed there deliberately. We both looked around the cabin, but there was no sign of anyone else having been there recently. No food, no belongings, nothing out of place. The door had been closed when we got there, which meant someone had been there before us, either to bring the calf inside or to make sure it stayed there. It didn't make sense. If this had been a place where someone had lived, there would have been signs. But there weren't. My mind started to race. What was the point of putting the calf in here? It didn't fit any pattern I could think of. There were no occult symbols, no signs of ritualistic behavior, no items left behind that might indicate the person had been doing anything but what seemed like abandoning the calf. Maybe it had been trapped there on purpose. Maybe someone had left it to starve to death. The thought made me shudder. Despite the uneasy feeling building in my chest, Adam lit the joint. We smoked it between the two of us, sitting on the old chairs, trying to ignore the dead calf in the center of the room. The rain was louder now, the sound of it pounding against the cabin's roof filling the space. But the noise didn't drown out the feeling of being watched. I couldn't shake it. It felt like something was in there with us, like the cabin had its own presence, something that didn't want us there. At some point, we decided to leave. The cabin didn't feel safe anymore, and we couldn't stay there with that calf staring at us like that. As we walked back out into the storm, the feeling of dread didn't fade. It stayed with me, like a shadow just behind me, following me through the woods. When I got home, I didn't say anything to anyone. I didn't even tell Adam about the feeling of being watched. I didn't know how to explain it, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to. But that wasn't the end of the strange things that happened to me. When I graduated high school, I ended up working in an assisted living facility, one of those places that looked like a luxury hotel but had an expensive price tag to match. The residents paid top dollar for the peace of mind that came with the nurses on staff, the amenities, and the round-the-clock care. Most of the rooms were occupied, but there were a few apartments upstairs that were left empty. We had staff working in the upper floors, but those apartments were rarely used, and they were locked off most of the time. One night, I was doing a late shift, just wrapping up when I heard the call light go off in one of the empty rooms upstairs. The call light was one of those old-school pull-string kinds. There was no way it could go off by accident. I thought it was odd. Maybe someone had broken into the room? But the more I thought about it, the more it didn't make sense. No one should have been in there. I went upstairs to check, and when I got to the room, the call light was still on. I opened the door, and the room was completely empty. The bed was made, everything was in place, but the call light was glowing brightly. I couldn't figure it out. Maybe the string had been pulled by accident, but it didn't make sense for it to happen in an empty room. I shrugged it off, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Later that same night, something even stranger happened. A resident who lived on the same floor had called for assistance, so I went into her room to check on her. She was fast asleep, but when I went to the living room to grab her medication, the call light in the other room went off again. This time, the room wasn't empty. I went inside and found the call string pulled, just like before. But this time, the nurse station was right next door, and no one had entered the room. I told the other CNA about it, but she just laughed. "That room's been like that for months," she said. "The lights go off all the time. No one knows why. It's just one of those things." But that wasn't the only strange thing. It wasn't even the scariest thing that happened to me. The most terrifying thing happened when I was just 5 or 6 years old, shortly after my mom remarried. We moved into an old house, one of those big, creaky places with a history that no one could quite remember. The house had a large walk-in closet in the master bedroom, but my room, right off the living room, was the biggest, and it came with its own closet too. It was the first night I stayed in that room, and I was restless, like I always was. I woke up in the middle of the night, disoriented, and when I looked toward the closet, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The closet door was cracked open, about a foot. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but then I saw it, a shadow darker than the darkness itself, with glowing red eyes. It stood there, its hand resting on the wall outside the closet, its presence so strong that I could feel it even without seeing the full shape. I didn't scream. I couldn't. I was frozen in fear, but after what felt like an eternity, I bolted from the room, not stopping until I was safe in my parents' room. The next day, I I refused to sleep or play in that room again. My parents moved all my stuff out the next morning, and I never slept in that room again. My stepdad later told me that he had felt something too, someone pressing up against him while he cooked, but when he turned around, there was no one there. After that, I never felt quite safe in that house again. It was old, it was eerie, and there was something off about it. Maybe it was just a combination of my young mind and the weird, isolated feeling of being in a house that had seen more than its fair share of years, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. The strangest part about that house, though, wasn't the feeling of being watched. It was that it stayed with me long after I left. Whether it was the calf in the cabin, the weird call lights, or the shadow in the closet, the unease never really went away. And now, years later, when I think back on it all, I can't help but wonder if it was all connected somehow. Maybe it's just the way my mind works, but I've always felt like the things I experienced weren't just coincidences. They were warnings, things that didn't belong, things that shouldn't have been there, but were anyway. And sometimes, no matter how far you run or how much time passes, you can't ever quite shake that feeling. The feeling that something is watching, waiting, just outside the reach of the light. I must have been about 8 at the time, and like most kids, I was always looking for a good way to spend a Saturday. A couple of my friends and I had made plans to spend the day at one of their houses. It wasn't a huge, exciting day by any means, just another day of playing outside, racing bikes, and goofing around like kids do. But little did I know, that day would stick with me in a way I couldn't explain for years to come. The house we were at was one of those old places, the kind that's got a lot of character. I don't mean character like in a cozy way, more like the type of place where the creaky floors and thick walls give off a certain vibe. I had been there before, but there was something about it that always made me uneasy. It wasn't spooky, at least not in a typical sense. There were no chains rattling or doors slamming, but there was this feeling in the air, something that felt off, hard to put into words. My friend, let's call her Lily, had recently moved into the house with her parents. They had just finished settling in and had started making a few updates. The house, though, still had plenty of quirks. One thing that always stood out to me was this room in the back. It was walled off from the rest of the house, which always seemed odd. I mean, why would anyone wall off a room in a house unless there was something to hide? It didn't make sense to me. I don't know if Lily had ever told us exactly why it was like that, but I never asked. Something about it just made me feel like I shouldn't. That Saturday, we spent a good chunk of time playing outside. It was a crisp day, not too hot, just the perfect weather for running around. At one point, I remember we were all standing near the back of the house, talking and laughing as kids do when you're distracted by something. Lily was looking up at the house, and she suddenly stopped mid-sentence. "Look," she said, pointing toward the window of that walled-off room. We all turned to see what she was pointing at. At first, I didn't know what I was looking at, but then I saw her, Lily's grandma, standing in the window. She was just there, clear as day, standing still looking out at us. I could tell it was her because she had this distinct way of standing. Tall, with a cane, a little hunched but still strong. I don't know what it was, but seeing her face there made me excited. I remembered all those times Lily's grandma had made us her famous butterscotch pudding, and the thought of getting another batch made me smile. So, without even thinking, we all started rushing toward the house, eager to get inside and see her. We ran through the back door, bursting into the kitchen where Lily's mom was sitting at the table. Her dad was standing beside her, holding her in an almost protective way. At first, everything felt normal. I was just happy to be inside, but as soon as we burst into the room, something hit me. The look on Lily's mom's face wasn't one of excitement or happiness. It was pure grief. She was crying, her face streaked with tears. It was the kind of crying where you don't even try to hide it. Lily's dad was trying to comfort her, his hand on her shoulder, but it was obvious something was wrong. Lily's mom looked up at us, her eyes wide with shock and disbelief, but she didn't say anything. It felt like time froze for a moment. It didn't take long for us to understand why. Lily's dad cleared his throat, looking like he didn't know how to break the news. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and steady. "You kids need to sit down for a minute," he said, his voice cracking a little. "There's something I need to tell you." We all gathered around the table, confused. What was going on? I had no idea what was happening, but I could tell from the way they looked at each other that something was off. That's when Lily's dad told us the news. Lily's grandma had passed away. It wasn't a long illness or something slow. No, it had been a freak accident. They hadn't expected it. She'd been walking in the yard when something happened, and she slipped or tripped, and that was it. Just like that. Gone. I remember feeling like I couldn't breathe for a second. My mind couldn't process it. The woman I had just seen in the window, Lily's grandma, was dead? It didn't make sense. We had just seen her standing there. We had all seen her, clear as day. We kept looking at each other, trying to make sense of it. Surely, we thought there was some kind of mistake. She had to be in the house, right? Maybe they hadn't heard us come in, and we could still get that pudding. Maybe we'd see her in the kitchen, bustling around, acting like everything was fine. So, we did what any kids would do. We ran back to the room. I thought maybe, just maybe, we had missed something, that somehow she was still there, waiting for us. But when we got to that walled-off room, it was just as it had been before. The window was still there, but there was no sign of her. The room was exactly as it had been before. No one had knocked into it, like we thought. It was untouched. I stood there, staring at the window for what felt like forever. I could still see her face, clear as day, just standing there looking out at us. But now, knowing what I knew, the whole thing felt wrong. I didn't want to say anything, but I think the other kids could feel it too. We just couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. After a while, we sat quietly in the living room, trying to digest what had just happened. But I couldn't stop thinking about that window. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that there was something about that room, something about the way she had been standing there. That didn't sit right. It wasn't just that she'd been dead. It was the fact that we'd seen her at all. How had she gotten there? And why was she standing in that window, looking at us like that, at that exact moment? As the day went on, we stayed inside. Lily's mom and dad had to deal with everything that had happened, but it felt like the whole house had changed. It was different now. There was a weight to the place, something heavy that none of us could shake. We spent the rest of the afternoon trying to ignore it, playing games and distracting ourselves. But I couldn't help it. Every time I looked out the window, I thought I saw her standing there. Her face would flash in my mind. That image was burned into my memory, and I couldn't forget it. The worst part was that I couldn't make sense of it. We eventually left, and I don't think I ever talked to Lily about it again. She didn't mention it either, probably because she knew it was one of those things that didn't have an answer. It wasn't until years later, when I was much older, that I realized just how strange everything had been. People talk about seeing things, having experiences, but when you go through something like that, something that doesn't have an explanation, it sticks with you. It haunts you. I still remember that day like it was yesterday. I still remember the feeling of seeing Lily's grandma in that window. I still wonder, even now, how she got there. Was it just a trick of the mind, a kid's imagination playing with reality? Or was it something else? I don't know. But one thing's for sure, it was real, and it was something that I can never forget. I had lived in that house for just over 3 years. The neighborhood was quiet, tucked in a rural stretch with wide driveways, big yards, and lots of trees that cast shadows over the cracked sidewalks. The kind of place where people waved but didn't really talk, where porch lights flickered on at dusk, but no one came out to sit and enjoy them. The house itself was older, a 2-story structure with that familiar creak in the floorboards, especially near the base of the stairs. I used to brush off all the little things that made it different from any house I'd lived in before. Doors that didn't quite close all the way, lights that sometimes took a second flick to come on. The way the air always felt just a few degrees cooler upstairs no matter how high I cranked the thermostat. But I didn't mind any of that. Not really. The layout was functional, the yard was decent, and we'd gotten it for a good price. That night was one of the last I spent there. My daughter hadn't been feeling well that day. It wasn't anything serious, no fever, no visible signs of illness, but she had that sick kid look about her. Puffy eyes, slower movements, a kind of quietness that didn't come naturally to her. She asked me if I could sleep in her bed that night, and I didn't hesitate. I'd done it before. Her room was small, the mattress thin, but it didn't matter. When your kid asks for comfort, you give it. I figured I'd lie with her until she fell asleep, then sneak back to my bed next to my husband. I left the TV on in her room, one of those low-volume infomercial channels, with the kind of repetitive, soothing background noise that usually puts people out in under 10 minutes. It didn't take long for her to drift off. I could feel her breathing settle, feel the slack weight of her small arm draped across my side. I hadn't meant to fall asleep with her. I really hadn't. I'd even kept one leg halfway off the bed to make it easier to get up. But I was tired, bone tired. I remember thinking I'd close my eyes for just a second. The next thing I remember is waking up. Not in a slow, stretch and yawn kind of way, but sudden and sharp. Like I'd been pulled out of sleep by something. I didn't hear a sound. There wasn't a bang or a crash or even a whisper. But I opened my eyes with a start, wide awake in that weird, disoriented way that only happens when something doesn't feel right. The room was lit by the TV screen, just bright enough to cast a bluish glow over the bed. It was one of those infomercials for kitchen tools, I think. Something dull and repetitive, a hand slowly chopping vegetables over and over. The kind of thing that loops endlessly. The sound was low but steady, filling the silence. I didn't know at first why I'd woken up. I thought maybe it was just that feeling you get when you've slept in the wrong position. But then I looked down toward the foot of the bed. There was something there. I didn't know what I was looking at right away. My eyes were adjusting, and the light from the screen made everything weird and ghostly. But there was a shape at the end of the bed, darker than the rest of the room. Squat. Not standing, not quite sitting. It was positioned at the edge of the bed, crouched in this unnatural way that immediately made my stomach turn. It wasn't moving, but I could feel it. I could feel its intent, its attention directed toward my daughter. I didn't have time to process it. My body reacted before my brain caught up. I shouted loud and sharp. My voice came out before I even knew what I was saying. I snapped at it. My words were quick, instinctive, and filled with alarm. The shape reacted instantly, pulling back an emotion that reminded me of a startled animal. I remember thinking it looked like a dog the way it sat back. That same posture, legs bent, body low, like it was trying to decide if it should run or stay. I reached to my right, toward the nightstand, fumbling for the lamp. My fingers scraped against the base, knocking over a small lotion bottle before I finally found the switch. When I flicked it on, the room flooded with warm yellow light. I blinked hard, my eyes adjusting again, and looked back to where the figure had been. It was gone. There was nothing there. Just the soft indentation at the foot of the bed where my daughter's legs ended, her small feet tucked under the blanket. She didn't even stir. The TV was still going, still showing the same hands chopping vegetables over and over, its glow suddenly looking harmless, stupid even. My heart was racing. I sat up fully, scanning the room. The closet door was closed. The curtains at the window weren't moving. There wasn't a sound. I checked everything. The closet, the window locks, even the hallway. Nothing. The hallway was empty, the bathroom door half open, just like I'd left it. I walked through the house barefoot, every creak of the floorboards louder than usual. I checked the front door, the back door, the garage. All locked. Every window was secure. No signs of anything disturbed. No sign that anyone had been there at all. But I knew what I saw. I wasn't dreaming. I've had sleep paralysis before. This wasn't it. I wasn't frozen. I wasn't hallucinating. I moved. I shouted. I reached for the lamp and turned it on myself. I was fully awake, fully alert. The fear wasn't dreamy or distorted. It was real and sharp, and it clung to me. I went back to the bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed, watching my daughter sleep. Her breathing was soft and even. Her cheeks looked flushed, but peaceful. Whatever had been there hadn't touched her. It hadn't gotten the chance. That thought comforted me in the moment, but only barely. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I sat on the edge of that bed with the lamp on, watching shadows crawl across the walls every time a car passed outside. I listened for any sound out of place, but the house stayed silent. In the morning, I told myself I'd imagined it, that maybe the light from the TV had cast a weird shadow. Maybe I dreamed it and didn't know I was dreaming, but none of that sat right. The fear I felt, the way I jolted awake, the detail of the figure's shape and movement, it wasn't vague or hazy. It was solid and clear. That image of it crouched at the end of the bed stayed with me for days, weeks. I didn't tell my husband right away. I didn't even tell my daughter. I didn't want to give it weight. I tried to shake it off as some kind of one-time thing. But things had been off in that house for a while. There had been smaller things. The kind of things you try to explain away, but keep adding up until they start to weigh on you. Items going missing and showing up in places I didn't put them. Lights that flickered even after being replaced. Cold spots in the hallway upstairs, even during summer. My daughter occasionally waking up crying, and not able to explain why. She'd say she had a nightmare, but when I'd ask what it was, she'd just shake her head and say she forgot. I started noticing that certain rooms in the house made me feel uneasy. The guest room, especially. It was always colder, always darker somehow. Even during the day, it seemed like less light made it in. My daughter avoided it too. She never wanted to play in there. I'd find toys left half-played with just inside the doorway, like she'd started to go in and changed her mind. Still, I tried to stay logical. We were under stress. Finances were tight, and my husband was working more hours than ever. I was home a lot, managing things alone, and maybe I was projecting. Maybe it was stress, exhaustion, anxiety. But that night in my daughter's room felt different. It wasn't a suggestion or a feeling. I saw something. I know I did. That encounter stayed with me, and a part of me started to resent the house after that. I didn't feel safe there anymore. Not in the same way. I still went about my routines, still cleaned and cooked and slept, but something in me was always on alert. Like the house was too quiet. Like it was waiting for something. When we finally decided to move, I didn't hesitate. We needed more space, better schools, closer access to work. But deep down, I was glad to leave. I was relieved in a way I didn't want to admit out loud. I told myself I wouldn't think about that night again, that it was over. But I still see it in my head. The way the figure crouched there, like it had been caught. The way it recoiled when I shouted. The silence afterward, heavy and absolute. I don't know what I saw. I don't know if it was someone who got in somehow and slipped out before I turned on the light. I don't know if it was something stranger, something I wasn't meant to see. But I know it happened. I've never seen anything like that since. Our new place is different. Brighter. Calmer. The air feels warmer upstairs, not colder. My daughter sleeps peacefully. I sleep through the night now. But that image still visits me sometimes. When I'm lying in bed, half awake, and the shadows shift just right at the foot of the bed. I'll blink, and for a split second, I'll expect to see it again, crouched low watching. Waiting. But there's nothing there. And I tell myself that's a good thing. It was one of those late winter nights where the air feels too heavy to move through, like you're dragging your breath behind you. Everything felt thick and cold and dead, and I couldn't sit still. My thoughts were too loud in my head, too disorganized and relentless to stay cooped up in my dorm room with nothing but my laptop screen and stale textbooks for company. I was in my second year at uni and already falling apart a little, maybe more than a little. Sleep came in bursts, and usually only after hours of lying down with my eyes wide open, and I had this habit of walking when I couldn't shut my brain up. Sometimes I'd tell myself I was clearing my head, and sometimes I wouldn't even bother pretending. It was probably past 1 in the morning when I left that night. I didn't check the time, but the street was quiet in that specific kind of way you only get when even the drunk stragglers have made it home and the world is fully asleep. Most people think cities never go quiet, but once you're a couple blocks away from the main roads, especially out near the more residential or semi-rural edges like where I lived, it's a different world. Just silence and your own footsteps, echoing off fences and down driveways. The cold had settled into my jacket and jeans, but I liked it. It helped me feel something, kept me moving. There was no music, no headphones. Just the crunch of my shoes over gravel, the occasional metallic clink of a fence rattling in the wind, and the sound of some faraway dog barking at nothing in particular. I walked without thinking. Just a long loop through neighborhoods that looked the same in the dark, past empty bus stops and parked cars and closed-up storefronts. I had probably been out for an hour or more when my legs started to complain. Not quite aching, but heavy, like they'd been filled with wet sand. I'd started to head back by then, following a stretch of road I didn't usually take, but figured it would lead me back to somewhere familiar. The road curved slightly, and up ahead I saw a lamppost standing alone at the edge of a quiet intersection. Everything else around it was dark. Trees behind low fences, empty lawns, parked cars, black shapes against the even blacker sky. But the lamppost glowed a soft yellow circle on the pavement like an invitation. There wasn't a bench or anything nearby, but I figured no one would be around this late. I wasn't doing anything wrong. My legs were tired and I needed to sit. So I walked over to it and lowered myself to the ground, leaning back against the cold metal of the post. The sidewalk was hard and cold, but I didn't care. It felt good to rest. I let out a long breath and watched it cloud in front of me. I must have only been sitting there for 30 seconds, maybe a minute, when I saw someone round the corner from the direction I'd just come from. It caught me off guard. I hadn't heard his footsteps until he was almost within the circle of light. There was something quiet about the way he moved, not sneaky exactly, but soft. Hunched over, hands in the pockets of a hoodie that hung too long in the sleeves. His head was down, hood up, the kind of posture you see in someone who doesn't want to be looked at. I thought at first maybe he was homeless, but his shoes looked normal, clean enough. And he was about my age. Just off somehow. He walked past me without stopping, but as he did, he slowed just a little and said something. It was low and kind of mumbly. Just a few words, like 3 maybe. His voice was thin, almost like he was out of breath. I turned my head, trying to make out what he said, and he made a small gesture with his hand in the direction of the roundabout up the road. I was surprised he'd spoken at all. I hadn't expected anyone to talk to me at 2 in the morning in the middle of a dead street, especially not someone who looked like they wanted to disappear. But I didn't catch the first part of what he said. I thought maybe it was, "You can sit down over there." It kind of made sense, I guess. From where I was sitting, you couldn't see the full roundabout because of the way the brick wall in the center rose up and blocked it. Maybe he thought I was looking for a place to rest properly. A better spot. Maybe he was just being kind in a quiet, awkward way. I felt dumb suddenly, like maybe I was doing something strange sitting against a lamppost like that. And I smiled, too wide, and said, "Thanks a lot." The words felt clumsy coming out of my mouth. I was trying to be friendly, maybe overcompensating a bit for how awkward the moment felt. I was expecting a nod or a wave, but he just kept walking, shoulders hunched tighter, disappearing into the dark again without another word. I sat there for a second more, then figured I might as well walk over to the roundabout. If nothing else, it would make me feel like I hadn't just embarrassed myself for no reason. The roundabout was about 40 meters ahead, set in the middle of the intersection, like some kind of miniature island. A circular brick wall rose up in the center, maybe waist high, and some shrubs or plants I couldn't really see clearly filled in the middle. I stepped up onto the edge of it and was about to sit when I noticed the shapes on the ground. I leaned in, squinting. Bouquets. A couple of them fresh, some wrapped in plastic with printed store labels still clinging to the sides. A wooden cross leaned against the brick, with names carved into it. Small ones, neat but uneven. And taped up letters, folded paper weighed down with stones. There were candles too, melted into puddles of wax. One had a picture of a man in his 40s or 50s taped to the side, black and white print, blurry around the edges. I stood there, blinking in the low light, slowly understanding what this place was. It wasn't just a roundabout. It was a roadside memorial. Someone had died here. A recent death, judging by the freshness of the flowers and how clean everything looked. A car accident maybe, or something worse. My stomach dropped a little, and I felt the cold in my chest now, not just on my skin. I didn't sit down. I just stood there, staring at the picture, then at the cross, and then at the letters again. One of them had writing big enough to read from a distance. Just the first few words. "I wish we had more time." That was enough. And then it hit me. The way the guy had looked. The way he'd moved, slinking off like he didn't want to be seen. The way he'd said those words. "My dad died over there." That's what he'd said. That's what he meant. Not a suggestion. Not advice. Just a quiet, broken sentence from someone walking alone at 2 in the morning past the spot where his dad had died. I felt it like a punch in the chest. That sick twist in your gut when you realize you've made a mistake that can't be undone. I'd smiled. I'd thanked him like he'd offered me directions or something. I'd said it loud and cheerful, trying to be polite, completely misunderstanding the weight behind his words. The shame hit me in waves. I looked down the road, but he was long gone, swallowed up by the night like he was never really there at all. The street was quiet again. Just me and this makeshift grave in the middle of a road nobody drove down anymore. I stood there for a long time, not knowing what to do. I couldn't go after him. I wouldn't even know where to look. And what would I say? "Sorry I misunderstood your grief?" Eventually I sat down on the edge of the brick wall, but not for long. I didn't belong there. That space wasn't for me. I felt like an intruder. On the walk back home, I couldn't stop seeing his face in my mind. Or rather, the shape of him. I never saw his face clearly. It was always in shadow. I just remembered how his head was low, how his shoulders curved inward like the world was pressing down on him. I wondered if he walked by there often. If that was his way of remembering, or if he just couldn't help it. If he wandered like me, not to clear his mind, but because he couldn't bear to be still. Because sitting still meant thinking too hard. When I got back to my room, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, going over everything he might have been feeling when he passed me. The bravery it must have taken to even say those words to a stranger. The hurt that must have pushed them out of him. And the way I'd met it with nothing more than a dumb grin and a thanks. It's strange how something so small can sit with you for so long. I think about that night more than I probably should. Not because I think I did anything terrible, but because it reminds me how easily we miss the truth of what someone is carrying. A voice too quiet, a word misheard, a look not long enough. And just like that, you walk past someone else's heartbreak without even knowing it. Since then, I've walked past that roundabout a few times during the day. I've seen the memorial grow and fade. The flowers change. New ones appear. Old ones wither. The letters sometimes get replaced, sometimes not. It's been long enough now that the brick is stained with wax and petals, and the wood of the cross is starting to gray from the rain. The picture is gone. Maybe someone took it down. Maybe it just didn't survive the wind. But I still remember it. And I still remember him. I don't walk as much at night anymore. Not because I'm scared, but because I don't need to the same way I used to. I'm not better exactly, but I'm different. That night gave me something to carry too. A weight I didn't ask for, but maybe one I needed. And every time I think about it, I wonder what would have happened if I'd understood him in the moment. If I'd stood up. If I'd said something meaningful. But life isn't built for clean resolutions like that. Sometimes all you get is a passing moment under a lamppost, and a voice you can barely hear, and the silence that follows you home. I remember visiting my grandparents' house when I was younger, and there was always this uneasy feeling in the air. They lived on the first floor of an old house, and their neighbors were below them on the ground floor. The house itself wasn't particularly old, but it had that musty, aged feel to it. It was in a quiet part of town, with narrow streets lined with old trees, but there was something about the house that never felt quite right. My grandparents were always the type to shrug things off, never too quick to jump to conclusions, but over the years, they had mentioned strange things happening. It started with odd feelings, like a chill in the air that seemed to come from nowhere, or the house suddenly turning cold for no reason at all. They'd often say that they'd feel like they were being watched, and sometimes there were weird smells, like something sour or rotten that would appear and disappear just as quickly. I remember them telling me about seeing shadowy figures moving around, but when they'd look, nothing was ever there. My grandmother was particularly sensitive to these things. She would sit by the window at night and watch the street, sometimes with a far-off look in her eyes. She'd mention hearing things in the house, things that didn't belong. Sometimes she'd hear footsteps above her, but she was on the first floor, and there was nothing above her. She'd laugh it off, calling it the old house settling, but you could tell that it bothered her. The shadows seemed to move around in the corners of the rooms, just out of the corner of your eye. It was unsettling, like the house had its own pulse, and sometimes that pulse felt off. The neighbors across the street were a bit strange too. They would talk in hushed voices when my grandparents weren't around, mentioning how they'd see a man standing at one of the windows of my grandparents' house, peeking out at them from time to time. They said it wasn't often, but every now and then, there'd be someone at the window, just standing there watching. But my grandparents never saw anyone, or at least they never admitted it. It all seemed so innocent at first, just little things. A bump in the night here and there, odd feelings, and strange sounds. But then it escalated. One day, my gran had just gotten home from work. She worked at a nearby primary school, and she was always the first to get home after lunch. I was at home that day too, and I remember being in the living room when I heard the loud bang from the kitchen. It was so sudden, so violent, that it made me jump out of my skin. I could hear my gran's footsteps pounding up the stairs, rushing to see what had happened. When she got into the kitchen, the scene was almost unbelievable. All the plates, dishes, and cups were scattered on the floor, but they were in a neat pile, like someone had carefully arranged them there, only to smash them all at once. The drawers and cabinets were wide open, swinging loosely on their hinges. Even the overhead cabinets were hanging from the edges, as if they'd been ripped open. It didn't make any sense. It wasn't like a cupboard had fallen or a chair had knocked into something. It was as if someone had intentionally torn the whole kitchen apart. I could hear my gran shouting for my grandpa, but when he didn't respond, she rushed outside. She wasn't sure what to make of it, but there was a real fear in her voice. The neighbors downstairs had heard the noise and rushed up to check what was going on. They were just as stunned as we were. They couldn't believe what they saw. No one had heard any doors slamming, no windows breaking, nothing. And yet, the kitchen was a complete mess. It was like the house had just exploded from the inside out. That's when it started to feel real. Something wasn't right in that house. After that incident, my grandparents started talking about moving. The house, which had once been a cozy place to live, now felt like a trap. Every noise, every shadow seemed like a reminder of something wrong. The strange feelings, the cold spots, and the odd sounds had been building up for years, but this was the final straw. They couldn't stay there anymore. But there was another story, one that my gran would only tell in quiet moments when she was feeling particularly reflective. It was a story that didn't make sense, and even after all these years, it still rattles me. My gran was lying in bed, unwell, when this happened. My grandpa wasn't home, and it was just my mom and her sisters at the house, maybe between the ages of 7 and 15. My gran had asked one of the girls to bring her something from the kitchen, and they'd gone to fetch it. But when one of them tried to come into her room, something strange happened. My gran heard the girl's voice shouting from the other side of the door, but there was something wrong. The girl was saying that she couldn't find the door, that it wasn't there anymore. My gran, confused and feeling unwell, pushed herself out of bed and went to the door. But when she reached it, she saw that the door had disappeared. It was just gone. The frame was there, but the door itself wasn't. She stood there, stunned. How could a door just vanish? It didn't make any sense. It wasn't until later that the door reappeared, or at least that's how my gran tells it. The door just appeared back in the frame, like nothing had ever happened. But it was unsettling, to say the least. The girls were just as confused as my gran, and none of them could explain it. When I asked my mom about it years later, she just nodded in agreement, but quickly changed the subject. She never spoke about it directly, but I could tell that it still bothered her. My grandparents moved out soon after that, and I never went back to that house. They found a smaller, quieter place on the edge of town. It was peaceful, calm, and most importantly, it was normal. But the memories of that house lingered. The strange events, the unsettling feelings, and the things that couldn't be explained. I can't say for sure what happened in that house. I don't know if it was something psychological or if there was something more to it. But every time I think about it, I can't shake the feeling that there was something wrong, something hidden beneath the surface of that house. Something that my grandparents, for all their rationality, couldn't explain away. It's been years now, and the house is still standing, but I've never been back. Every time I drive past that street, I can't help but glance at the window of the house. I half expect to see someone standing there, peeking out at me. It was a little past 9 on a late summer night when it happened. I remember the weather being perfect, warm but not hot, and a soft breeze that made the trees move just enough to make you feel like something was always there with you, even when you were alone. My girlfriend and I had been hanging out at a small shopping plaza near the edge of town. Not a lot of businesses there stayed open late, but there was a 24-hour diner, a gas station on the far end, and a few empty storefronts that made the place look more abandoned than it really was. We liked it because it was quiet, felt safer than some other places, and it had these tall street lamps that lit up everything like daylight. You could see every corner of the lot, every parked car, every sidewalk crack. It never felt sketchy, not really. We had just gotten into my car, her on the passenger side, me in the driver's seat. I had left the engine off while we figured out where to go next. We weren't in a rush. I remember she had taken off her shoes and pulled her legs up onto the seat. She always did that. The radio was off, and I think we were just scrolling through our phones at first, making little comments here and there about food or movies. I wasn't really focused on anything in particular, just enjoying the quiet moment. Then I heard this sharp, repetitive clicking sound. At first it didn't bother me. I thought it was something electronic in the car, maybe a relay switch or something mechanical settling. But it kept going, rapid and almost too consistent to be a random noise. It sounded like plastic snapping, fast and tight, right next to me but just slightly away, closer to her side. My first instinct was that she was bumping the door lock with her knee or elbow. That sometimes happened. The lock switch is right on the armrest, and if you're sitting sideways in the seat, it's easy to hit it without realizing. I leaned forward a little and glanced at her. She was looking at me already, a bit annoyed, like she thought I was messing with something. That confused look you give someone when something weird happens, and you assume it must be a joke or a prank. The clicking didn't stop. If anything, it started to speed up. I turned my head slightly, trying to pin down where exactly it was coming from. It was definitely coming from her door. Not the lock, though. It didn't sound like a lock cycling back and forth. It sounded different, more physical. Not like a button being pressed, but like something being tugged or flicked hard. And then the car started to shake. Not a violent shaking like something crashing into us, but more like a jerking motion. The kind you feel when someone grabs a door handle and pulls it up repeatedly and forcefully. Every couple of seconds, the whole frame of the car would twitch slightly toward that side. Not dramatic enough to feel like an impact, but noticeable, deliberate. The kind of motion you feel in your spine because it doesn't match anything else around you. The kind that makes your stomach twist, even when your brain is still trying to figure out what's going on. I remember looking straight at her door handle and seeing it move. It wasn't bouncing like from a bump in the road. It was lifting up, not smooth either. Like someone on the outside was yanking it up again and again, hard, fast, and with enough strength to shake the door in its frame. We both froze, completely silent. No music, no conversation, just the repeated, jerking sound of metal and plastic, and the quiet thud of the car responding to each pull. I scanned the windows, every one of them. My first thought, my hope, was that maybe someone we knew was playing a prank, some friend sneaking up on us. But there was no one, and we would have seen them. That's the part that still sticks with me even now. We were parked directly under one of those bright orange street lamps. The kind that lights up everything around it in that hazy, burnt-looking color. The light poured into the car like a spotlight. We could see everything. The pavement, the curb, the base of the lamppost, even the shimmer on the windshield. Nothing was hidden. If someone had walked up, we would have seen their shadow, their legs, their shoes, anything. There was no blind spot, no dark corner they could have crawled out of. But the handle kept moving. The noise kept going. I stared at her, and she stared back at me, both of us expecting the other to say something first. That silent moment stretched out long enough that the noise started to feel like background, just something you had to accept. And then, as quickly as it started, it stopped. Everything just went still. The car didn't move. The clicking sound vanished. It was dead quiet again. I didn't say anything right away. I turned the key and started the engine, letting the soft rumble fill the silence between us. I kept my hand on the gear shift for a few seconds before finally pulling it into park again and stepping out. I had to look. I circled the car once slow, checking the asphalt, the sidewalk, even crouched to peek underneath. Nothing. Not a single mark, not a shoe print, not a person in sight. Just the empty lot around us, a few cars scattered here and there, but no movement. No doors opening. No people walking to or from anything. I checked the back seat before I got back in. Again, nothing. The car was just as empty and quiet as before. We sat there for another few minutes, not saying much, just listening, watching. I don't remember if we eventually drove off or just sat there until the weird tension faded. I think we left not long after, but the drive home felt longer than usual. Everything outside the windows looked darker somehow, like the streetlights didn't reach as far anymore. I was constantly checking the mirrors, not really sure what I expected to see. When we got back to her place, she didn't mention it again. Not that night. Not for a long time. And I didn't bring it up either, not at first. But it stuck with me. Not just the noise or the shaking car, but the impossibility of it. The complete visibility around us. That was the part that made it worse. If it had been in a dark alley or out in the woods, I could have written it off as a raccoon or some messed up joke. But this was an open, brightly lit parking lot. We could see everything, and still we saw nothing. A few weeks later, I mentioned it to her again. She got uncomfortable real quick. She doesn't like to talk about it at all. Says it makes her feel sick to remember. Whenever I bring it up now, she either walks away or gives me this look like I'm poking at something that's better left buried. I've tried to rationalize it over the years. Maybe someone crawled up real low and stayed beneath the window level. Maybe they were crouching and slipped away right before I got out. But even that doesn't feel right. The timing, the noise, the force of it. It was like someone wasn't just trying to mess with us. It felt like they were trying to get in. Like they were furious the door wasn't opening. That blind, silent fury behind a locked door, hammering again and again, hoping the next pull would finally give. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if the door hadn't been locked. Sometimes I check the locks 3 or 4 times now before I drive off at night, even in safe neighborhoods, even in broad daylight. I can't shake the feeling of that handle lifting again and again, that tension in the metal, that small, jerking pull like someone ready to tear the door right off if they had to. It's been years now. We're married. We've got different routines, different cars, different places we go. But every once in a while, when we're sitting in the driveway late at night, I'll glance over at the passenger side door, and I swear, for just a split second, I can hear that clicking again. Quiet, almost distant, like a memory trying to force its way back in. And I still don't have an answer. No ghost, no monster, no fantasy. Just a door handle in a well-lit lot that moved when it shouldn't have, and no one there to explain why. That's what keeps me up sometimes. Not what happened, but that we never saw who did it. When my cousin and I were around 14 or 15, we spent most of our free time on the internet. We were both pretty curious kids, often stumbling across random websites, chatting with people, and exploring whatever caught our attention. It was around the summer, and school had just let out. That's when my cousin Max came to me with this new thing he had discovered at school. He had a knack for finding obscure stuff online, usually things no one else had heard about. This time, though, he seemed a little too excited about it, like he had just unlocked some secret. Max had found this website where you could ask questions, and the spirit would answer them. I didn't think much of it at first, brushing it off as some weird prank or some chatbot programmed to give random answers. But Max seemed convinced that it was real. He told me that it wasn't just some random algorithm that would give silly answers. He claimed that the site was actually tapping into some supernatural power, answering any question you asked with eerie precision. He was always the skeptic, though. Max didn't believe in anything supernatural, not really. He was just looking for something to mess with me about, something to get me to freak out. He knew I was more impressionable than he was, more willing to entertain strange ideas. I was the type who watched scary movies alone at night, and sometimes had trouble sleeping because of it. Max knew how to push my buttons, and he figured this was his chance to do just that. He told me to go on the site with him, and of course, I didn't hesitate. I wasn't scared of things like that, not really. I had seen enough horror films to know how these things worked. So we sat there, side by side, on his computer, staring at the screen, waiting for something to happen. At first, the questions I typed in seemed harmless enough. I asked basic things, questions like, what's my favorite color? Or what's my mom's name? The answers were right every single time. I figured it was some kind of coincidence, a trick I wasn't catching on to. But then, it started getting a little weirder. I asked it things about my past, little things I hadn't even thought about in years. I asked, what's the name of the dog we had when I was a kid? The answer came almost immediately. Max. I had to stop for a second. My first dog had been named Max, and I hadn't thought about him in forever. He died when I was really young, so it felt a little strange to hear that name come up like that, even though I tried to brush it off as just another coincidence. But then the answers started getting a little more personal. I asked about my dad's job, which wasn't something I had mentioned to anyone, let alone online. The answer was right. He works as a mechanic. I didn't even know how it could know that. I wasn't about to admit to Max that I was starting to get a little creeped out, but I was. Okay, I said, trying to act calm. This is just weird now. Max grinned at me, his eyes sparkling with mischief. Yeah, I know. It's kind of crazy, right? I kept typing, half in disbelief, half in curiosity. At some point, I decided to push it a little further to see if I could get something truly strange. Can you prove you're real? I typed, feeling a little daring. Max was already thinking ahead. He had been planning this all along. He knew that if I asked for proof, he could get a good reaction out of me. Without missing a beat, he typed, turn around. We were sitting in the living room at the time, just the two of us, and it was quiet. My parents were in the other room, watching TV. There was nothing unusual about the place. The house was calm, the sort of house you'd expect for a family. Nothing seemed out of place, and I didn't expect anything strange to happen. We both looked at the screen for a moment, and then Max turned his head and looked at me, waiting for me to go along with it. I didn't think much of it, still a little skeptical, but I decided to play along. "All right, let's turn around," I said, a half-hearted attempt to make it all seem less serious. So we both turned around, just like Max had typed. Nothing happened at first. It was quiet, the kind of silence that hangs in the air when you're waiting for something to occur, but don't really expect it to. I was still trying to convince myself that this whole thing was just one big prank, something that Max had set up to freak me out. But then, just as I was starting to relax, I heard something. It wasn't loud, but it was unmistakable. The plastic bird decoration my parents had sitting on the shelf in the corner of the living room, a small red cardinal, began to move. Its wings twitched. The bird, which had been perfectly still just seconds earlier, started flapping its wings like it was alive. It wasn't much, just a subtle movement, but enough to make my stomach drop. I froze for a moment, staring at it. My heart started pounding in my chest. I looked at Max, expecting him to be as freaked out as I was. But instead, he was grinning. He didn't look scared at all. It was like he knew exactly what was going to happen, like he had planned this whole thing to get a reaction out of me. We both jumped up at the same time and rushed over to the bird. My first instinct was to see if something had made it move, maybe a draft or some kind of outside influence. I checked the air vent nearby, the windows, and even the shelf it was perched on, but there was nothing. The room felt completely still. The bird was still moving, its plastic wings flapping up and down, just as if it had come to life for a brief moment. My mind raced. It didn't make sense. There was no breeze, nothing around that could explain why it was moving. I was starting to panic, my hands shaking as I looked around for some logical explanation. Max, on the other hand, was standing off to the side, still looking amused, like he was watching me lose my mind over something that didn't even matter. "Did you do something?" I asked him, my voice shaking now. He didn't answer right away, which made me even more uneasy. Instead, he shrugged and said, "No, I didn't touch it." That's when I really started to feel the weight of what had just happened. I wasn't scared of ghosts or spirits, but this didn't add up. I knew Max well enough to know that he wouldn't have set up anything like this, not like this. He would have been laughing by now, but he wasn't. The look on his face was serious now. His eyes were wide, his usual grin gone. I reached over and touched the bird, trying to stop the wings from moving, but it kept going, like it had a life of its own. After what felt like forever, it finally stopped, and the room was quiet again. Max and I just stared at each other for a long time, both of us in disbelief. I could tell he was shaken too, though he would never admit it. We both stood there for a while, trying to wrap our heads around what had just happened. Neither of us said anything. The tension in the air was thick, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Max spoke, his voice quieter than usual. "We need to stop using the site. Now." I agreed without saying another word. We both turned off the computer and sat in silence for the rest of the evening. Neither of us brought it up again. We didn't talk about the bird or the website or the strange feeling that lingered in the air after the wings had stopped moving. The next day, we were both too afraid to even mention the site. Neither of us ever went back to it. We never spoke about it again, and eventually, it became one of those things we both pretended never happened. But every now and then, I still think about it. The bird, the way its wings moved on their own, and the way Max had acted, like he knew exactly what was going to happen, like he had planned it from the start. It's been years now, but I still get the occasional chill when I think about that night. I don't know what happened, and I'm not sure I ever will. I just know that whatever it was enough to make me believe that sometimes there are things in this world that we can't explain. I used to act with a theater company that operated out of a building that had been standing for over 800 years. The building was old, and you could feel it in the thick, heavy air that clung to the worn stone walls. The entire place felt like it had absorbed so much history. It was practically alive with stories. Obviously, with a building that old, there were plenty of ghost stories floating around. People would whisper about strange sounds, fleeting shadows, and odd occurrences. But I never really bought into any of that. I'm not a believer in ghosts, or anything like that. I was there to do my job, to act, to be part of something, and to enjoy the thrill of performing. Watching other people freak out about the creepy tales was actually one of my little pleasures. I'd been acting with the company for a couple of years at that point. The theater had a rhythm to it, a season that began in autumn, with rehearsals in the chilly air of the old building and a 6-week summer run of performances. 3 different plays ran during that time, alternating. I was in one of the plays, but the company would often rope me into doing some background work or filling in for extras in the other productions. One of those plays was The Tempest, and it was a fun, chaotic production where I ended up playing the role of an angry spirit. For my role, I wore a ridiculous costume, a tight white stocking that covered my face, a wild, unkempt white wig, and a loincloth with body paint. I had to move silently, lurking in the shadows, my body paint smearing across the set. It was all about creating the right eerie vibe, playing the role of a spirit bent on creating chaos. I didn't mind it. It was a bit silly, but it was part of the fun. I loved the challenge of slipping in and out of character, especially when I was part of a crowd scene. One night, it was getting close to the final scene of The Tempest. The play had a lot of people running around and doing big, dramatic gestures, and I wasn't needed on stage for that part. I was one of many spirits and figures in the scene, so it didn't matter whether I was on stage or not. But I figured it was a good opportunity to slip away for a bit. The theater itself was built in a strange old way, with various parts and rooms scattered across the grounds. One of the places I would often head to when I needed to get away from the chaos of the stage was the changing room that had been recently renovated. This changing room was tucked away in one of the attic spaces, and before it had been transformed into a dressing area for the actors, it had been used as servant quarters. The entrance to it was tiny, barely wide enough for someone to squeeze through. You had to climb up 4 floors of narrow wooden stairs to get to it. It was a bit of a trek, but once you were there, you were in your own little world. It was quiet, isolated from the hustle and bustle of the rest of the theater. So that night, after deciding I didn't need to stick around for the final scene, I made my way to the back of the hall. The theater was built with an outdoor stage area that looked out over a stretch of trees. It wasn't quite a forest, but it was wooded enough to give you that sense of isolation. I slipped through the back entrance of the hall, moving quickly across the stage area, the sound of my footsteps muffled by the soft dirt beneath my boots. I made my way to the back stairs leading up to the changing room. The wooden stairs creaked as I ascended, the only sound in the still night air. Halfway up, I heard something that made me stop dead in my tracks. Someone was singing. It was faint, but clear. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to make me wonder who else could possibly be up here at this hour. I hadn't seen anyone leave the theater, and I couldn't imagine why someone would be up in the changing room this late. Brilliant, I thought, a grin spreading across my face. This is the perfect opportunity to scare the shit out of one of my friends. I pulled my mask down over my face, fixed the wild white wig in place, and moved the rest of the way up the stairs. My heart raced a little from the excitement. I was going to give someone a good scare, maybe one of the more superstitious members of the crew, who always had a wild story to tell about the theater's spooky history. I was going to play on their nerves, maybe even get a good laugh out of it. When I reached the top of the stairs, I could still hear the singing. It was louder now, though, and a little clearer. It sounded like a woman's voice, but it was strangely distorted, like it was coming from somewhere far away or underwater. As I crept closer to the open door of the changing room, I could feel the anticipation building. I waited, listening to the soft hum of the song, taking a deep breath. And then, I leapt into the room, letting out a loud, guttural yell. Ray-ar-ga-ha. But when I landed in the room and skidded to a stop, there was no one there. The room was empty, completely empty. The shock hit me first, my mind racing to process what had just happened. The singing, the voice that had sounded so close just moments ago, had stopped the instant I entered the room. I froze, confused. I checked the room again, feeling a creeping sensation crawl down my spine. There was no one in the room. No one hiding behind the small wooden partition. No one in the corners. There was nothing in there except for the empty furniture and the dusty old walls. But the worst part wasn't the emptiness of the room. It was the lingering feeling that something wasn't quite right. The singing had been as real as if someone had been standing next to me. It was so vivid, so clear, and yet there was no one there. My mind raced, trying to come up with an explanation. Maybe someone had been hiding, and they slipped out when they heard me coming. Maybe it was some trick of the acoustics in the old building, making the sound travel in strange ways. But none of that made sense. There was no way out of that room without me seeing them. The only way they could have gotten past me was if they physically moved me to get by. And that just didn't make sense. I could feel the blood drain from my face as the adrenaline kicked in, and I realized that I needed to leave that room. Now, I turned on my heel, practically tripping down the stairs in my haste, the mask slipping from my face as I sprinted down the narrow staircase. My heart pounded in my chest as I reached the bottom floor, desperate to get back to the safety of the main theater. I pushed through the back doors, running into the open space of the stage area. I didn't stop to look back, not even when I heard the faintest echo of something from upstairs. I didn't care. All I could think about was getting away from that room, away from whatever strange sensation had taken root in my gut. When I finally made it back to the theater, I took a moment to catch my breath, trying to shake off the terror that had settled in my bones. I went to the rest of the crew, trying to act nonchalant, but I could tell they saw something in my face. I wasn't joking around. They could see that I was shaken. At first, they thought I was playing a prank. It wouldn't have been the first time I had pulled a stunt like that, but this was different. I was confused, unsettled. I couldn't explain what had just happened. After the show, once the audience had left and the place was quiet, we went back to the changing room. We called out to see if there was any way the sound of singing could have come from somewhere else. We tried shouting from outside, listening for an answer, but there was nothing. The building was silent. No one had been in there but me. No one had made that noise. But the memory of it still haunted me, creeping into my mind every time I thought about that night. It's been 25 years since that night, and I still don't know what to make of it. I don't believe in ghosts or spirits or anything like that. But there was definitely something in that room with me. Something that I couldn't explain. The sound of the singing, so real, so vivid, and yet no one was there. The fear from that night stuck with me. It was a fear I couldn't shake, not because I thought there was a ghost in the room, but because I couldn't make sense of what had happened. And maybe that's the scariest thing of all, the feeling that something is out there, but you can't see it, can't explain it, and don't know how to protect yourself from it. When I was 10 years old, my family moved into what we thought was our dream home. It was tucked behind a thick line of trees, just off a busy intersection in Elk Grove, California. You'd never guess there was a house back there, unless you knew exactly where to look. The trees formed a kind of natural wall, muffling the traffic sounds and hiding us from view. It felt private, almost like our own little world. The yard was huge, and there was a separate shop in the back with a concrete floor and wide windows. It felt like the kind of place where you could just settle down and stay forever. My parents were so excited. They said it was going to be a fresh start for all of us. After the last box was brought in and the movers had gone, my dad said we should celebrate. We went out for ice cream that evening. I remember the sun was just starting to set, that warm orange kind of light casting long shadows across the pavement. Everyone was in a good mood, laughing and eating in the car. It felt like one of those rare moments when everything was right. But when we pulled into the driveway, something felt off. The gate, this big wooden thing that always creaked when you opened it, was swung wide open. At first, my parents thought maybe the movers had forgotten to shut it, but when we went inside, my brother's laptop was gone from the kitchen table. The front door was still locked, but the side door leading to the shop was cracked open. My mom called the police, and they showed up about half an hour later. One officer went around checking the house, shining his flashlight into corners and closets, even though it was still light outside. He ended up climbing up into the attic, and that's where he found a black garbage bag that had been shoved behind the insulation. Inside it was a bunch of marijuana. My dad said it must have belonged to whoever lived there before. The officer didn't seem too concerned, just told us to get rid of it. He took a report and said they'd keep an eye out, but nothing really came of it. No one ever found out who broke in. We got locks for the gates and set up a camera above the shop entrance, just in case. For a while, things were calm. Nothing else happened for about 3 months. We started to relax. It started to feel like home again. My mom repainted the walls in the kitchen and planted flowers near the driveway. I started riding my bike around the neighborhood, and my brother made friends with a kid down the road. We'd forgotten about the break-in by the time we decided to take a weekend trip to Monterey Bay. It was the middle of summer, and the weather was perfect. We spent 2 days by the beach, eating fish tacos and watching the sea lions bark at each other. When we got back late Sunday evening, everything seemed fine at first. But when my dad went to unlock the side shop to put something away, he found the windows were all shattered. The glass was everywhere, scattered across the concrete like glitter. Inside, the place had been trashed. The shelves were knocked over, and tools were missing. The kitchen door leading to the house had been left slightly open. Inside, the kitchen was a mess. All the drawers had been pulled out and dumped. The refrigerator door was wide open. Someone had taken food, spilled milk across the tile, and left the empty cartons on the floor. My mom didn't say much. She just started cleaning in silence. That night, my dad stayed up late watching the cameras, but there was nothing. Whoever had done it had avoided them, or maybe unplugged them before getting in. The next morning, we installed floodlights around the yard. My dad borrowed a rifle from my uncle and kept it in the bedroom. None of us really felt safe anymore, but we didn't know what else to do. The police came again, took another report, but didn't find any prints. We figured maybe it was just some desperate person, someone looking for food or money. That didn't make it feel any better, though. A day after that, I was in the backyard playing with our dog when I saw a man on the far side of our back acre. He had a big dog with him, some kind of shepherd mix. He was walking slowly, looking around, like he was searching for something. I watched him for a minute before I went inside to get my dad. My dad came out fast, shouting across the yard, asking what the hell the guy was doing on our property. The man didn't say anything. He just turned and ran. He climbed over the fence like he'd done it before, the dog following right behind. My dad stood there watching for a while. He didn't say anything either. Nothing happened after that for a few months. Fall came, and the leaves started to drop. We raked them into big piles and tried to act like everything was normal. We had Thanksgiving at home and invited my aunt and uncle. December came around, and we decorated the house like usual. My mom hung lights around the porch and put little fake snowflakes on the windows. Christmas came and went without anything weird. I think we all started to believe maybe it was over. Then March came. Across the street lived this old couple. I didn't know their names, but I'd see them sometimes on their porch, reading or drinking coffee. They were quiet, always polite. But around early March, they weren't there anymore. Their porch stayed empty. No lights on in the evening. No movement in the yard. At first, my mom thought maybe they'd gone on a trip, but then we started seeing people around their house. They looked like they were in their 20s, maybe late teens. None of them looked familiar. One night, I looked out my window and saw 3 of them standing in the driveway, just talking. One of them pointed at our house. It wasn't like a casual glance. It was a long, deliberate point. That night, we stayed up late. My brother and I sat in the living room, the lights off, just watching. We kept hearing voices. Not loud, just enough to make out certain words. Things like wait until they go inside, and just break in. Every creak of the house made my stomach twist. My dad sat in his chair with the rifle across his lap. None of us slept that night. A month passed. Nothing happened. Then one morning, around 9 a.m., we saw police cars outside the house across the road. Not just 1 or 2, there were 6 of them, plus an ambulance and a fire truck. There were cops with dogs searching the area, going through the yard, looking behind the shed. One of them climbed onto the porch roof. We stayed inside. My parents didn't even talk about going over. Something about it felt different from before. Bigger, more serious. For the next few days, the house stayed surrounded by yellow tape. No one came or went. My dad said to keep the doors locked no matter what. He started parking the truck so that it blocked the driveway. My mom called a realtor. She said we were done. Over the next 2 weeks, we packed everything up. The house started to feel hollow. Every room echoed. We took the furniture in 2 loads and left the appliances for last. On the second to last day, we saw something that made us stop in our tracks. The house across the street was surrounded by police again. Only this time, there were people in hazmat suits. They had masks on and were carrying out black garbage bags, some of them dripping. We stood by the truck, watching from a distance. My dad finally walked over and asked what had happened. One of the officers told him they'd discovered a double homicide. The elderly couple had been murdered. Not just murdered, chopped up, dismembered, and stuffed into their own refrigerator. A friend of theirs had gone over after weeks of not hearing from them and reported a terrible smell. The cops found bloodstains that had seeped into the floorboards. They said the suspects were young, early 20s, and that at least one had already been arrested. They were still looking for the others. The officer told my dad that there had been squatters in the house, probably the same people we had seen. He said they believed the murders had happened sometime in January, before we ever heard those voices in the night. which meant the killers had been right across the road, watching our house, whispering to each other while we slept. The next day, we came back to get the last few things. When we pulled into the driveway, my mom gasped. All the appliances, our fridge, washer, dryer, were out on the lawn. They hadn't been stolen. They'd been dragged out and left there. The front door was wide open. Inside, the place was trashed again. But this time was worse. The smell hit us first, old food, mildew, maybe something worse. The kitchen floor was covered in mud. Cabinets hung open, hinges bent. My bedroom had all the drawers pulled out and thrown around. My mattress was slashed down the middle, stuffing spilling out like guts. In the living room, our baby grand piano, something my mom had saved for years to buy, had been sawed in half. Not broken, not smashed. Someone had taken a saw and cut through it, clean down the middle. The bench was missing. The keys were scattered. My dad didn't even go upstairs. He just turned around and walked out. My mom started to cry, not loud, just this quiet sound that I'll never forget. We loaded what we could into the truck and left everything else. My parents never spoke about the house again. We moved into a rental on the other side of town. Smaller, older, not in the best neighborhood, but it felt safer. There were no trees hiding us from view. You could see the street, the neighbors, the mail truck pulling up every morning. It felt like breathing again. The house we left behind went on the market a few weeks later. Not as a home, but as a commercial property. It's still there, somewhere in Elk Grove, behind those trees. If you didn't know what happened there, it might even look perfect. But I do know, and I still remember. I still think about it every single night when I crawl into bed, and it still freaks me out, so much so that I can feel my heart racing just recalling the details. I've told this story a few times, but it still feels too fresh. It might sound dumb, but it wasn't until months later that I fully processed what happened, and the terror of it hasn't left me since. What happened in that small, cramped space between my bed and the television stand is something I can't shake off. Let me start from the beginning, so you understand what I'm talking about. I've always been the kind of person who sleeps under a lot of comforters. Not just one or two, but several. I like feeling cocooned, wrapped up tightly like nothing could get to me. Maybe it's a comfort thing, I don't know, but I just need that weight. My bed is right next to a television stand, and between the two pieces of furniture, there's only about 1.5 to 2 feet of space. It's just enough room to walk by, but way too small to sit comfortably between them. It's cramped, and if I were any taller, it would be near impossible to even move around in there. And I'm not exactly tall, 5 feet 5 inches, but even I can barely squeeze between them. My sister, who's a few inches taller than me, can't fit either, and my dad is even taller, so I can't imagine how anyone could manage to fit in that tiny space. So, this was about 1.5 years ago. I woke up one morning, lying on my side, facing the television. I remember feeling a little groggy, still not completely awake, and I noticed something strange. One of my comforters had fallen halfway onto the floor during the night. Nothing new, that happens all the time. But this time, there was something odd about it. The comforter was lumpy, as though something was underneath it. And not just a little lump, but a big, defined mound that stuck up from the bed. It wasn't like it had just shifted. It was as if there was something underneath that was creating this large, uneven shape. And the weirdest part, the height of the lump was perfect. It was right at eye level when I was leaning on my elbow, about 2 to 3 feet off the floor. I remember thinking, what the heck is that? It was a perfect silhouette, like the shape of a person curled up underneath the blanket. I'm a little embarrassed to admit this now, but I didn't feel the immediate panic you might expect. Instead, I laughed. In my groggy state, I thought, oh, this is my boyfriend trying to prank me. We often joked about sneaking around and trying to scare each other. It seemed like something he'd do, get under the blanket, and wait for me to wake up and notice. I smiled, thinking he was being funny, and then I did what anyone would do in that situation. I reached out and pressed my fingers into the lump, trying to find his forehead to poke him awake. But what happened next was anything but funny. As soon as I pressed my fingers into what felt like a solid object, I felt resistance. It didn't just shift like a blanket would with no weight. No, this felt real, like there was something underneath that was pushing back. I pushed harder, expecting him to just shift or laugh, but instead, the lump didn't just give way. It stayed firm. When I pressed it down, the weight didn't immediately bounce back, like I had imagined it would. It felt like a real head, and the pressure was there. As I pushed with my arm, the lump slowly resisted, and when I pulled my hand away, it would rise back up slowly, like it was following my movement. At first, I thought it was a game. I laughed again, thinking maybe it was just a clever prank. I pushed again, harder this time, and sure enough, the weight shifted, but it wasn't going anywhere. This wasn't a flimsy trick or a bag of pillows. This was real, solid human weight. By this point, I was starting to wake up completely, my brain starting to process the situation. This couldn't be my boyfriend. He doesn't live here, and there's no way he could have snuck into my room, gotten under the blankets, and made himself sit there without me noticing. The lump in front of me wasn't just some innocent joke. It felt wrong. I pushed again, but this time, I was more aware of what I was feeling. It was a person's head, the size of it, and the weight behind it unmistakable. The way it shifted under the blanket, the way it pushed back as I applied pressure. It wasn't the kind of resistance you'd get from a pillow or a pile of clothes. This felt like it was a human body, like someone was sitting underneath the covers. I stopped laughing. A knot tightened in my stomach, and my heart began to race. Who the hell was under my blanket? No one could fit in that space. It was way too narrow for anyone to be sitting up in it. I could barely fit between the bed and the television stand, let alone someone else. I started backing away from the lump, my body trembling now as the reality of the situation set in. I could feel the sweat on my palms as I ripped the blankets off of me, yanking them away from the bed, my hands shaking. The lump was still there, sitting on the edge of my bed, unmoving, as if it was just waiting for me to notice. That's when my sister walked into the room. I must have looked insane, terrified, wide-eyed, still shaking as I scrambled away from the bed. She asked my name, her voice full of concern, probably because of the frantic look on my face. I didn't know what to say. I just stared at her, frozen, still trying to pull myself out of the panic that was flooding my mind. When I looked back at the bed, the lump was gone. It had vanished. No bump, no movement, just the blanket flat on the floor. My heart dropped into my stomach, and the fear was overwhelming. How could it just disappear like that? I had been touching it, pushing on it, and now it was completely gone. I turned to my sister, and I could see the concern in her eyes, but there was no understanding in her expression. She asked if I was okay, if I needed anything, but I couldn't explain it. I couldn't tell her what had just happened, because even I didn't fully understand it myself. There was no sound, no creak, no shift in the blankets. It was as though the thing had just vanished into thin air, leaving no trace behind. I had been pushing on it, feeling the weight of a person, but now there was nothing, just the flatness of the blanket on the floor, as though nothing had happened at all. I don't know if it was some kind of trick of the mind, or if it was something else entirely, but I know what I felt. I know that I wasn't imagining the solid weight, the resistance, the way it pushed back every time I shoved at it. That wasn't something you just make up. It was real, and it still terrifies me to this day. Was it a person? How did they get there? Why did they leave without a sound, without a trace? And why did it happen to me? All I know is that I still don't sleep the same way. I check my blankets every night, just in case. I can't help it. That fear, that feeling of something being under my covers, has stayed with me since. And no matter how many comforters I pile on, it's always in the back of my mind. What happened that night? The feeling of someone's head under my blanket, the pressure I felt, the way it moved as though it were alive, it still haunts me. There's no logical explanation for it, no easy answer. All I know is that it happened. And it wasn't some silly prank or a sleep-induced hallucination. It was real. And that's the scariest part of all. When I was 13, I had this feeling of wanting to grow up fast. I noticed that there were always a lot of girls who stayed after school for different programs, and they were the older ones. I wasn't exactly popular, but I figured if I hung around, I might have a chance to talk to them, or at least just be near them. So for a while, I started to loiter outside the school, hanging around the edges of the parking lot or the school courtyard, looking for an excuse to chat, flirt, or just watch them. It wasn't anything serious, just harmless teenage curiosity and the desire to fit in. I did this almost daily. I'd walk home from school, but instead of going straight back, I would delay my return. I'd wander around the yard, casually walking past the school, sitting on the edge of the field, or hanging out near the basketball courts. It wasn't just about the girls, though. I was starting to feel restless and curious about things I didn't fully understand. It was as if I wanted to experience more of the world outside the boundaries my parents set for me. I wasn't allowed to smoke, obviously, but I started hearing about it more. Kids talking about smoking behind the school or in the woods near the football field. It wasn't like I had a burning desire to smoke. At least, that's what I tried to tell myself. But one day, I don't know, I got this sudden, almost strange urge to try it. It was like an itch in the back of my mind that I couldn't ignore. For some reason, I thought it might make me feel more grown up, or maybe it was just the thought of doing something I wasn't supposed to. I'd seen the older kids do it, the ones who looked so much cooler than I was. They'd light up, puff away, and act like nothing mattered. One afternoon, when my aunt came to visit, she left a pack of cigarettes on the kitchen counter. She wasn't the kind of person I saw often. She lived far away, and her visits were rare. I didn't think much about the cigarettes at first, but then it hit me. My aunt was a smoker, and her pack was sitting there, almost like an invitation. I'd never had the guts to ask for one before, but something about that pack made me think, why not? No one would notice, right? I quickly grabbed a cigarette when nobody was looking. It wasn't like I was planning on doing it in front of anyone. I just wanted to try it by myself, away from prying eyes. I had no idea what I was doing, but I had to find out for myself. So I snuck outside, walked to the very end of our yard, and went behind the shed. The air was thick with summer heat, and the grass swayed lazily in the wind. I pulled the cigarette from the pack, staring at it for a few moments, unsure of what to do next. I'd seen enough people smoke to get the general idea. I flicked the lighter, and after a couple of attempts, I finally got the tip of the cigarette burning. It wasn't exactly like the movies. The smoke tasted awful, harsh, burning the back of my throat. I coughed a lot. My hands shook as I tried to take another drag, unsure if I was doing it right. It didn't matter though. I felt something. Maybe it was the act of rebellion, maybe it was just the nicotine, but for the first time, I felt like I was doing something risky, something grown up. I didn't know how long I stayed there, smoking that one cigarette. Maybe it was only a few minutes, or maybe it was longer. The sky was getting dimmer, the shadows creeping closer as the day ended. I finally threw the cigarette on the ground and stomped it out, not wanting anyone to find it. I walked back to the house, trying to act like nothing had happened, my mind still buzzing with what I had just done. The next few days felt normal, or at least I tried to make them feel that way. I didn't think much about the cigarette after that. It was just one thing, one small act. But then, things started to change. My aunt came back for another visit, and I noticed her acting differently around the house. I didn't know it at the time, but she had been trying to quit smoking. She'd been counting her cigarettes, tracking every single one. The moment I had taken that one from her, she had noticed. The cigarettes weren't just a casual item for her. They were something she was trying to wean herself off of, and now I had gone and stolen one. I didn't find out what was really happening until a few weeks later. My mom sat me down one evening, and I could feel the weight of the conversation before she even spoke. It was like a knot in my stomach. She wasn't angry, not exactly, but there was something different in her tone. She started telling me everything she knew. She knew I'd stolen the cigarette from my aunt. She knew I'd been sneaking out after school to hang around with the bad kids, and that I'd been smoking with them. She wasn't accusing me of anything, just stating facts, like she had been watching from a distance. It hit me like a ton of bricks. How could she know all this? She said she found the cigarette, but's outside my window. Wait, what? I froze. I had only smoked once, that one cigarette behind the shed. I hadn't smoked anywhere near my bedroom window. I had made sure of that. But there they were, the cigarette butts, right outside my window. My stomach turned as I tried to make sense of it. The truth was, I didn't even know where those butts came from. I hadn't smoked any other cigarettes since that one time. I felt completely helpless. My mom wasn't accusing me of something I hadn't done. She was just telling me the facts. And those facts didn't make sense. If I hadn't smoked by my window, then who had? Who was smoking outside my room without me knowing? My heart pounded as I tried to think back, remembering every detail. It was like the world had suddenly shifted. I couldn't explain it, and I certainly couldn't make anyone believe that those butts weren't mine. All the adults around me seemed so sure, so convinced. My mom and dad had found them, and because of that one stupid cigarette I'd smoked behind the shed, no one was going to believe me. I spent days feeling like I was drowning in confusion and guilt. I didn't know where the other cigarette butts had come from, but no one was listening to me. I couldn't explain the situation without sounding like I was just making excuses. In my mind, there was no one else who could have done it, but I still couldn't figure out how those butts had ended up right outside my window. Was I being paranoid? Was it possible someone had been sneaking around the house without me hearing them? The thought made my skin crawl, but no one believed me. The evidence was clear. I had smoked that one cigarette. So the rest of the butts? They must have been mine too. That was the only explanation they could come up with. No one else was involved. No one else could have done it. I was the one who had broken the rules. Eventually, the whole thing faded into the background. My parents moved on, though the tension between us never really went away. I never found out who was smoking outside my window, but I spent the next few months obsessed with the idea that someone was out there, watching me. I couldn't shake the feeling that my world had been invaded, that something strange was lurking in the shadows. It was a feeling that never fully left me, even when everything else returned to normal. But here's the thing, I never smoked again. The one cigarette, the one time I tried to be a part of something I didn't understand, made me realize how quickly things could spiral out of control. And even though I couldn't explain what happened with the cigarette, but I understood something deeper. There are things in life that you just can't control, things that happen when you least expect them, and you can never fully undo the damage once it's been done. In the end, I learned a lot from that experience, though it wasn't easy. I never went back to smoking, and I never loitered after school again, trying to fit in or seek approval from the wrong crowd. It wasn't worth it, not when I had seen how easily a single mistake could turn into something far worse than I ever imagined. I don't know why, but when I think back to the house I grew up in, the basement is the first thing that comes to mind. It wasn't some spooky, cobweb-filled cellar or anything. It was actually one of the nicest parts of the house, finished with wood paneling on the walls, soft carpet that always felt warm, and little areas decorated with things I loved. There were shelves filled with books, old toys, and even some of the stuff that hadn't found a place upstairs. It was like my little kingdom, where I could play, build, and just be left alone. I was between 6 and 8 years old at the time, still young enough to get lost in the world I created with my Legos or whatever else I could find. That basement, though, especially the part one called the other side, wasn't like the rest. Most of the basement was finished, yes, but there was one part, the other side. That wasn't. It was a storage area, kind of separate from the rest of the finished space, and it was dark, messy, and well, a little bit off. We kept old boxes, tools, and all sorts of junk there that didn't belong anywhere else. It was a room most people in the house didn't go into much. Honestly, I didn't go in there much either. The dark, musty smell, the way the lights were controlled by an old string hanging from the ceiling, and the fact that the lights only reached partway into the room made me feel uneasy. Even if there wasn't anything dangerous, there was always this sense that it just wasn't right, like it didn't belong. But that day, I remember so clearly. I was sitting on the soft, multicolored carpet with my Legos scattered around me. I had built some sort of fortress, maybe a castle or a spaceship. I don't really remember, but I had gotten so focused on it. The colors, the shapes, the way the pieces clicked together. I had no other care in the world. No one else was down there with me. The house was quiet. I was by myself. The kind of silence that made you feel like you could hear everything, even the faintest of sounds. Then it happened. Clear as day, I heard my name. It was a voice deep and calm, but I knew exactly who it was. My grandfather. I can't explain how, but the voice was so familiar that I didn't question it for even a second. He'd been gone for a while at that point, and I was just a kid, but somehow I knew. I don't know if it was the way he said my name or just the warmth I felt from it, but there was no doubt in my mind. "Come here, kid," the voice seemed to say, almost like an invitation. I froze. My heart didn't race, but something in my stomach turned. It was like my body reacted before my brain had the chance to figure out why. My grandfather? He'd been dead for years. I'd even been at his funeral, so I knew that voice wasn't coming from anywhere else. Still, I stood up. My instincts took over. There was this part of me, this childlike urge to do what was told, to follow the sound of that voice. I left my toys where they were, stumbling across the basement floor as I moved toward the door to the other side. I hadn't been in there for a while. I avoided it because it was dark, cold, and just felt wrong. I don't know why, but it did. But that voice, that feeling of familiarity, pushed me forward. It led me to the door. It was an old wooden door, nothing fancy, but it always stuck out to me. It didn't match the rest of the basement's warmth and coziness. There was no doorknob, just a simple brass handle, and it always felt cold to the touch. The door itself never seemed to close properly, no matter how much we tried to fix it. I stood there, staring at the knob, wondering if I should open it. Something about the door made me hesitate. I reached out and grabbed the handle. I turned it, but it didn't budge. It was odd. I had been in and out of that room dozens of times. The door had never given me trouble before. Maybe it was stuck. I didn't really think about it. I just tried again. This time, the door seemed to fight me, as if there was something on the other side pushing against it. Something blocking it. I pulled harder, but still nothing. After a minute of struggling, I gave up and stepped back. I stood there for a moment, confused and unsure, but I knew I couldn't leave it at that. That voice still echoed in my head. I couldn't explain why, but I felt like I had to get in there. I tried the door again, this time with a little more force, and it finally gave way. The door creaked open with a low sound that sent a chill up my spine. The darkness on the other side swallowed the little light that filtered through from the basement. I hesitated before stepping into the shadows, but I did. I walked inside, and the air immediately felt colder, denser, and heavier. The lights were still off, and the string that hung down from the ceiling remained out of reach. There was something about that darkness that made my chest tighten. I had been in there before, but it was never easy. Something about the way the room was set up, all the old boxes and tools, always made me feel uneasy. The way the shelves were half-filled, like they were waiting for something, didn't help either. I didn't see anything out of place, nothing unusual, but the whole room felt off. A deep, unsettling feeling I couldn't shake. I looked around quickly and then rushed back to the door. I closed it behind me and started up the stairs, back into the light of the main house. I found my mom in the kitchen and rushed to her, telling her what had happened. My voice was shaky, and I felt like I had to explain it, even if it didn't make sense. I told her about hearing Gramps' voice, how it had called me down there, how I had gone into the other side to find him. She stopped what she was doing and looked at me for a long moment. Then she gently shook her head. "Sweetheart," she said, her voice soft but firm, "your grandfather passed away when you were just 3. You were at the funeral. I'm sure you were just hearing things." I nodded, but I didn't believe it. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had called me down there. That voice, it felt so real. I couldn't explain it, but I didn't want to talk about it anymore. My mom went back to what she was doing, and I returned to the basement, trying to push the experience from my mind. But it lingered. I decided to turn on all the lights in the basement, just to feel safer. I flipped the switch for the overhead light, turned on the TV, and surrounded myself with as much light as possible. I wanted to drown out the darkness, to push away the uneasy feeling that had settled in my chest. The basement wasn't supposed to feel like that. It was supposed to be my safe place. But the more I thought about it, the more that part of the basement, the dark, uninviting storage room, felt like a place I never wanted to go again. I didn't even like walking past that door anymore. I never told anyone else about it, not even my mom. The basement stayed the same, quiet, comforting, with its soft carpet and walls lined with toys and memories. But the other side remained something I avoided. It was like that one place in the house that just didn't belong, and for reasons I couldn't explain, I never ventured in there again. Over the years, the feeling of unease I had about that room faded, but I always kept my distance from it. There was something about it that didn't sit right with me. And though I never heard that voice again, the memory of it stayed with me, deep in the back of my mind. Sometimes, when I visit my childhood home, I'll walk past the basement door and glance down. It looks the same, untouched by time, but I can still remember the darkness of that place, the feeling that something wasn't right. And maybe it's just because I was a kid, but there's a part of me that wonders what might have been down there all along. Maybe it was just my imagination playing tricks on me, but that voice never fully left me. It was still dark outside when the alarm buzzed at 5 a.m. I didn't hear it though. I was dead asleep, curled under the covers, unaware that anything strange had happened until much later. But my wife told me everything in the car while we were driving to work, and even now, hours later, I'm still thinking about it. It's not the kind of thing that screams paranormal or anything dramatic like that. It was just off. Just enough to make you stop and think, to feel a little chill that doesn't come from the weather. We lost one of our dogs back in October. He was the smaller of the two, the more vocal, the more energetic. He'd been with us for years. A real presence in the house, the kind of dog you don't just remember. You feel the absence when he's gone. We did everything we could for him when his health started declining, but you can only hold off the inevitable for so long. That last day was quiet and awful and quiet again. The vet gave us a clay paw print and snipped off a small bit of fur. We hadn't gotten around to framing them yet, but they were safe in the office. We didn't talk about it much afterward, at least not in words. Grief has a way of settling in the silence between things. Our other dog, the bigger one, is still with us. He handled the loss better than we expected, though I guess you never really know what's going on in their heads. We kept most of the toys out of sight for a while. It just didn't feel right seeing them scattered around without our smaller dog darting between them, squeaking them one by one like he was rating their quality. Yesterday, though, I decided to clean up the living room. We'd let the clutter pile up a bit, mostly because we'd both been working late and tired by the time we got home. I started with the corners of the room, moving aside some folded blankets, pulling cushions off the couch, and stacking things where they belonged. I vacuumed, dusted, even cleaned under the coffee table where a few of the dog toys had rolled and been forgotten. I found all sorts of things under there, an old tennis ball, a plush squirrel with one ear chewed off, and finally, that orange egg toy. It was weird looking, bright orange plastic with this dumb smiling face painted on the front. But it had been both dogs' favorite, especially the one we lost. It had a really sharp, high-pitched squeak to it that was impossible to mistake for any of the others. He used to hoard it, sleep with it tucked under his chin, even take it to the door when he knew we were going out, like he wanted us to know he had everything he needed. I hesitated for a second when I found it again. The plastic was scuffed, the face a little worn off from years of chewing, but it was still in good shape. I turned it over in my hand for a while, then placed it with the rest of the toys in a small pile near the couch. I figured our big dog might enjoy seeing some of them again. He sniffed at the pile, ignored most of them, but when he saw the orange egg, his whole demeanor changed. He didn't bark or get overly excited, just calmly walked over, picked it up, and carried it to the corner near the window. He laid down with it between his paws like he was guarding it. It was the only toy he touched the whole evening. Later that night, my wife and I had dinner, watched a few episodes of some show we'd been behind on, and went to bed. Nothing unusual. I don't remember if the dog brought the egg with him into the bedroom. I don't think he did, but it's possible. He sometimes does that, carries things into the room with us, then forgets about them halfway through the night. That was all yesterday. This morning was when things got strange. My wife almost never wakes up before 6. Her alarm is set for 6:15, and she usually snoozes it twice. But today, she woke up at 5 exactly. Not a second later, she said. There was no sound that jolted her up, no dream she could remember. Just sudden, full alertness like something had clicked inside her brain and told her now. Wake up now. She didn't wake me. She figured maybe she could take her time getting ready, maybe even stop for coffee on the way to work. Our big dog was lying on the carpet between the bathroom and the bedroom, watching her like he always does when she's getting ready. He doesn't sleep in bed with us, too big, but he always stays nearby. Some mornings he dozes off again while she showers or does her hair, but today he was fully alert, just watching her with that calm stare he has when he's quietly trying to figure out what's happening. She told me she had just started curling her hair when she heard it, the squeak. Not just any squeak, not like a door hinge or the wood floor settling or the dishwasher humming. She said it was that exact squeak, the high-pitched sharp one that only that orange egg toy makes. You could play a dozen dog toys in a row, and she'd be able to pick that one out. She froze, curling iron still in her hair, and turned toward the sound. Our dog was still lying on the carpet, still staring at her, not moving. The toy wasn't in his mouth. It wasn't anywhere near him. The sound, she said, came from behind the closed office door. It's not a heavy door, just a simple wood one we painted white when we moved in. It latches shut easily, and she remembers closing it the night before. Inside the office is our work-from-home setup, a couple bookshelves, and a small box on the far corner of the desk where we put the paw print and the tuft of fur. It's not fancy, just something to keep it safe until we get the frame we want. The room doesn't have anything in it that should make a squeaking sound. No vents or appliances. No open windows. She turned off the curling iron and checked everywhere she could think of. First the hallway, then back to the bedroom where I was still sleeping. She said she even looked under the blanket, thinking maybe I had somehow rolled over a toy in my sleep. But everything was still in the living room. The orange egg toy, all the rest, nothing had moved. She stood there for a minute, staring at the office door. It was still shut. No sound, no movement, just the normal silence of early morning. She thought about opening the door but didn't. She said it wasn't fear exactly. It just didn't feel necessary. Like whatever had happened had already passed. Eventually, she went back to finishing her hair, then came to wake me up like she usually does. I had no idea anything had happened. I showered, got dressed, made my usual lazy cup of instant coffee, and we headed out. She told me the whole thing in the car. It wasn't dramatic. No big emotions. Just a kind of quiet retelling, like she was still sorting through it. She wasn't trying to scare me or make a point. Just putting the pieces in order, trying to understand how a squeaky toy made a sound from a closed room when the toy was still in the living room. I didn't have an answer for her. Still don't. I think we both silently decided that it didn't need one. We talked about it for a little while, then moved on to something else. Work stuff, probably. Something mundane. But even now, after everything else the day brought, I keep circling back to that moment. The toy, the squeak, the exact timing of it, the way she woke up out of nowhere, like someone had nudged her. The way our other dog was perfectly still, not reacting, not playful, just watching. It's not the kind of thing that makes your hair stand up or your stomach drop. It didn't end with a discovery or a twist. There's no dramatic moment, no figure in the shadows, no bumps in the night, just a sound, familiar, clear, and out of place. It felt like something small nudged the world out of alignment for just a second, like something remembered, something noticed. Not a ghost or a spirit, nothing supernatural, just a detail out of time, like an echo left behind. We didn't talk about it again that night. But when I got home from work, the office door was open. I asked her if she opened it, and she said no. Maybe I did it without thinking, earlier in the day. Maybe. I don't know. The orange egg toy is still on the floor where I left it. I saw our dog sniff it once more that evening. He didn't pick it up again, though. Just gave it a sniff, sat down next to it, and stared at the office door for a while. And that was it. I vacuumed later that night and moved the toy back into the toy basket. I didn't think about it when I did it, just trying to clean up before bed. Nothing else happened. No more sounds. No more strange feelings. But when I sat down on the couch and looked across the room at the basket of toys, I realized something. It didn't feel like something scary. It didn't feel like something bad. It felt like something remembering, or maybe saying goodbye, or maybe just stopping in for a minute to say, I'm still here. That's all. Just once. And then quiet again. I still think about that building. I don't work there, not directly, but my mom does. She's a caseworker, has been for years. Her office is in a small complex tucked behind some trees on the edge of town. The kind of place you don't really notice unless you're looking for it. One main building with a few adjacent wings, nothing fancy, mostly beige and brick, with a couple of handicap ramps, chain link fencing, and a small back lot for staff parking. I used to wait for her there after school sometimes. I remember how quiet it always was. Cold inside too. The kind of cold that makes you feel like you should keep your voice down. The people inside were nice though. Mostly women working there. Always offering me juice or crackers while I sat in the corner on my phone, waiting for my mom to wrap up. Her office was on the far side of the building, down a long hallway that had mismatched tiles and an old clock that never kept the right time. I must have been there a couple dozen times over the years. Always felt the same. Still quiet, harmless. But out behind their office, maybe 100 yards away, there's another building. Bigger. It's kind of half hidden if you're not paying attention. It's got that look to it, gray, a little grimy, windows all dark and clouded like someone rubbed oil on the inside. I always knew it was there, but no one really talked about it much. It used to be a mental health facility, closed down in 2013, supposedly due to funding issues. I didn't think twice about it until all this happened. My mom told me the story one night when I was visiting her place for dinner. I don't think she meant to tell me the full thing at first. She just sort of started talking about it like it was no big deal. But by the end, she looked different. Kind of tired, like she'd carried the weight of it around for a while. It started off normally enough. One afternoon, a few years after that facility shut down, some police officers came into her office. They explained they'd be using the old building for training drills from time to time, fire drills, maybe even search and rescue simulations. They didn't give a whole lot of detail, just wanted to make sure the people in the office knew, so they wouldn't be caught off guard if they saw lights or heard noise. That sort of thing. My mom said everyone appreciated the heads up and didn't really think anything of it. For the first few days, nothing happened. Then, maybe a week later, a few of the clients started saying things. People coming in for appointments were visibly shaken. One woman came in crying. She said she'd heard screaming coming from the direction of the old psych facility. Not just one scream, several. Different voices. People yelling, shouting, banging, like someone was throwing furniture or kicking walls. She said she saw shadows moving behind the boarded-up windows, fast and chaotic, like a riot or something. Another man said he saw people running back and forth past one of the broken doorways, arms flailing, no clear faces, just movement and noise and panic. At first, the staff thought it was part of the drills, that maybe the police were using actors or something. But then someone called the precinct just to double-check. There hadn't been any scheduled drills that day, or that week. In fact, no one had been inside that building for nearly a month. That's when people started getting uneasy. My mom said the whole atmosphere at her office shifted. What used to be an ordinary day job started feeling a little off. The women working there, some who'd been at that office for over a decade, started talking among themselves in quiet voices, trying not to scare the clients. They all knew about the building. They'd seen people hanging around it over the years. Homeless folks mostly. Sometimes teenagers sneaking in. They never saw anything dangerous, so they let it go. Just people looking for shelter or somewhere private to smoke or whatever. But after that day, after the screams, they realized maybe it wasn't just a harmless spot anymore. The police did check it out. A couple of officers showed up the same day and went inside. Nothing. No signs of a break-in. No fresh footprints. No trash. No sleeping bags. No damage that looked recent. They even brought in a dog the next day. One of those K9 units trained to sniff out people. But the dog refused to go inside. Just sat down at the entrance and started whining. Wouldn't move. One of the officers tried to tug on the leash, but the dog fought back. Didn't bark. Didn't growl. Just low whining, like it was scared of something deep inside the building. And that wasn't the end of it. A couple of weeks later, one of the women from the office was outside, having a cigarette near the break area. From where she stood, she had a clear view of the old facility. It was late afternoon, sun already starting to dip, and she swore she saw a light flick on inside one of the upper windows. Just for a second, then off again. A few seconds later, another window on the opposite side lit up and shut off. She didn't say anything until it happened again 2 days later, and this time another staff member saw it too. No electricity had been flowing to that building since it shut down. My mom said she checked herself. There was no utility bill attached to that address anymore. It was listed as inactive. About 6 weeks after the initial police visit, the officers came back into the office. This time, they weren't relaxed. They looked tired. One of them had bags under his eyes and didn't speak at all. The other told them, bluntly, that they'd no longer be using the building for drills. They tried. A couple of times, actually. But each time something went wrong. The first time, a rookie officer got spooked and accidentally discharged his weapon inside. Claimed he thought he saw someone rush him in the hallway. No one was there. The second time, one of the firemen twisted his ankle, trying to chase down what he thought was a person darting into one of the side rooms. They thought maybe it was one of the other officers, or a squatters, but when they did a full sweep, no one was inside. Again. But what really pushed them over the edge were the sounds. My mom said the officers never wanted to explain fully, but it was clear whatever they heard made them feel deeply uneasy. One of them said it was not something you can train with. They said sometimes it sounded like screaming, other times it was more like howling, except it wasn't quite human, and it wasn't quite animal either. One officer apparently vomited outside after leaving the building. Another refused to go back in, and eventually transferred to another department. From that day on, the building was sealed off. Chain link fencing went up around the perimeter. The main doors were reinforced and padlocked. Signs posted on all sides, no entry, no trespassing, hazardous structure. They even put in a security camera pointed at the front, though no one seemed to monitor it much. The whole place was just left to rot. But that didn't stop the weirdness. The women in the office kept seeing lights. Not every day, but enough that they all knew it wasn't their imagination. A flicker in one of the back rooms, a soft glow from the stairwell window. Sometimes it looked like someone was walking past with a flashlight, even though the entire building was empty and locked tight. And always the same kind of lights, faint, inconsistent, and always in places no one should have been able to reach. There were no more screams, but people still reported feeling strange around it. Clients coming in for appointments said they felt watched walking from their cars. A couple refused to park on that side of the lot at all. One woman said she heard breathing, loud and ragged, like someone just around the corner gasping for air. But when she turned, no one was there. Maintenance guys came out a few times, tried to figure out if maybe the power lines had been improperly cut or if there was some sort of battery system still running inside. They couldn't find anything. One guy said it was probably just light catching broken glass the right way. Reflection. Another guy quit the job 2 days later. Didn't say why. It's strange how things like that stay with you. The building is still there, far as I know. Still locked up. Still fenced off. But every time I visit my mom's office, I find myself looking at it. It hasn't changed much. Still got that dirty, fogged look to the windows. The metal siding near the roof is starting to rust. One of the emergency staircases on the outside has half collapsed, so now it just hangs there, twisted. But the main structure is still intact. I never went inside. Never had a reason to, but I've stood close to it. Once during winter, when my mom forgot her lunch and I offered to drop it off. I parked near the back, just on the edge of the lot, and had to walk past the building on the way in. It was quiet that day, windless, cold, but when I walked by, I remember hearing a soft, rhythmic clunking sound, like a loose metal pipe swinging against something solid. Clunk, clunk, clunk. I looked around, but I couldn't find the source. Nothing was moving. No breeze. No loose siding. Just that sound. I didn't stick around to figure it out. My mom still works there. Says it's quieter now. Calmer. Most of the women who were there during the strange months have either retired or transferred out. A few still remain, and they don't talk about it anymore. Not openly. It's one of those unspoken things. Just part of the background now. Something that happened. Something real. I don't believe in ghosts. I don't believe in monsters or demons or anything like that. But I do believe that buildings can hold on to things. Not spirits. Not magic. But memories. Sounds. Feelings. Sometimes places just go bad. Not because of what's inside them, but because of what was once there. What happened behind the walls. What people carried in with them, and what they left behind. That building wasn't haunted. Not in the storybook sense. It was just damaged. The way a person can be damaged. And maybe that damage just echoed again and again until it started to make noise. Started to show